Okay, good. Woo. All right, that's loud. Great. I'm not complaining. That's a good thing. All right, good evening. I call to order the meeting of the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School Committee on Thursday, February 27th, 2025 at 7 o'clock p.m. And I invite you all to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next up, I am going to ask Amy to read the land acknowledgement.
The Hamilton-Wenham, that is loud. The Hamilton-Wenham Regional School District would like to acknowledge the Massachusetts tribe, the tribe of indigenous peoples from whom the colony, province, and Commonwealth of Massachusetts have taken their name. We would like to pay our respect to the ancestral bloodline of the Massachusetts tribe and their descendants who still inhabit historical Massachusetts tribe territories to this day.
Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have an opportunity for citizens' comments. There are no citizens present in the room. Mr. Tracy, is there anyone?
Would you like me to make citizens' comments online? Nope. Good.
Okay, seeing none, we will move on from citizens' comments, and the time for comments will be closed. Next up, Trent, would you be willing to read a portion of the school committee protocols, please?
Yes. As elected members of the Hamilton-Wenham Regional School Committee, we, including the superintendent, accept the high honor and trust that has been placed in us to ensure that the students of the district receive the best education possible. To that end, we hereby commit to the following in the conduct of our business. Members will refer constituent concerns and complaints, including issues relating to district personnel, to the appropriate person within the district chain of communication.
Thank you. Jen, are you willing to read a portion of the school committee mission statement?
The Hamilton-Wenham Regional School District Committee's mission is to ensure our schools create graduates with a passion for lifelong learning, together with the critical skills needed to maximize their potential. The Hamilton-Wenham Regional School Committee will lead and inspire a district that attracts and retains high-quality educators by acknowledging and respecting their expertise and professionalism.
Thank you. Next up, I am pleased to say we have our student representative report. This evening we have Anderson Kraft here to give us a report.
Thank you for having me. So coming up on Tuesday, April 1st at 6:30 is the one-man show performed by Jake Ryan Flynn. This show is taking place at the North Shore Music Theater to raise money for the Hamilton-Wenham Theater Program. Auditions are taking place on Friday, February 28th from 3:30 to 8 p.m. for all members of the high school chorus. Boys and girls basketball will each be hosting home games tomorrow against Cathedral and Amesbury, respectively. The boys' game will start at 5:30, with the girls' game following that at around 7:30. The varsity cheerleaders will have a meet at 11 a.m. on Sunday, March 3rd for the MSAA Regional Championship at Bill Ricker Memorial High School. And then this morning, the 93 members of DECA that qualified for states left for Boston. Over the next 2 days, they will be competing against other schools from around Massachusetts. Recently, at the middle school, winter intramurals have ended, with new ones starting up this spring. The middle school also has many different clubs happening, like art club, chorale, jazz band, GSA, NHJS, and homework help that have been meeting once or twice a week. At the elementary school, last Tuesday, Winthrop School had a kindergarten information night for parents of upcoming students. Coming up on Saturday, Cutler is hosting an open house for the incoming kindergartners. And finally, on March 12th and 13th, Bucher will be hosting the annual book fair for all students. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have questions for Anderson? Anderson, I had a quick question. I just wanted to make sure I got it right. Did you say that the boys and girls basketball are both at home on Friday, tomorrow?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
They go back to back.
Thank you. All right. Anybody else have anything?
I didn't realize you were going to be here tonight, Anderson. Well, actually, I did. Dante told me. Right?
Anderson was willing to step in
Stepped
last
in
moment,
for-
so that was really helpful. I'm very
Sick
appreciative.
classmate.
All right. Anderson, we are so grateful that you took the time to come. It means a lot to us to get an update right from the students. You are invited to stay for the rest of the meeting. However, we know you may have other things that you have on your plate, homework and such. So it's up to you, but you're absolutely, certainly allowed to go if you're ready to go.
All right, thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have the consent agenda. Do any members have any items that they would like to hold from the consent agenda? Julia, do you have anything?
No.
I should have said at the beginning, I don't think I said any of the things. I don't think I said this is being recorded and live streamed, and I should have also said that we do have one member who is participating remotely, Julia Campbell. So all votes will be roll call votes. Sorry about that. All right, did anyone else have anything to hold?
Do
Okay.
the school committee members get to use the Mario Kart scooter?
You can hold it to ask.
And
If we have a motion.
you're gonna do it, I'm gonna do it.
You're looking like Donkey Kong. All right. I move that the Hamilton Wenham Regional School Committee, approve the consent agenda as appears in tonight's meeting agenda.
Second.
Second by Amy Kumberger. And there's no discussion because it's a consent agenda. Julia?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Trent?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
And Dana's a yes, and that is unanimous of the 6 members present. And the motion passes. Okay. Next up, moving right along to new business, we have a presentation on some water testing procedures.
I'd like to invite up Director of Maintenance Facilities and Operations, Curtis Whiteman, who's been working on this for a few weeks, tried to solidify and get something in place. So we're going to run the first presentation by you this evening. Switch up on the presentation here.
Is this automatically just going to go?
It might not, but we can make it though.
Curtis, can you also just do a test of the mic to make sure we,
Check 1 2, check 1 2.
I can hear you just fine, I just wanted to make sure.
I tend to project
Yeah,
anyway,
no,
so.
I just wanted to make sure it was recording so that people that want to watch the recording can see it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me tonight, members of the school committee, Mr. Tracy, Mr. Leone. So I'm here tonight to talk a little bit about the water testing plan. This was something that has come up a couple times since I've started, and so I really had to dig into a lot of the different requirements that DESE, the EPA, Mass DEP dictate that we follow. So as such, I've developed a plan. I believe that's part of the exhibit that was provided for tonight. My apologies, there were a few small changes. There were actually changes to the law that went into effect back in October. And they were published on the EPA's website back in January after I'd already created the initial meat and potatoes of this plan. So without further ado, primary purpose of the water testing plan is to ensure we're providing safe water for students, staff members, visitors, any members of the public that may come in. Really, any sort of drinking source, whether it's a faucet in a classroom, in a bathroom, obviously our bubblers is considered as part of this program. There will be, if you read through the plan that I provided, some areas where we won't be testing. A good example of that would be like a janitorial slop sink. I don't think anyone's going to go in there at any point and try and drink a drink of water. So So the biggest thing about this plan is that I'm trying to bring a sense of, obviously, safety to the water that we're providing and transparency. So if things come up, we'll react very quickly, notifications will be sent out, and action plans will be put in place. So, like I said before, this plan was developed in accordance with DESI, Mass DEP, and the EPA. DESI points to the Mass DEP points to the EPA, and it just kind of goes around in a circle. So I use a lot of the resources that were provided by the EPA and Mass DEP to develop this plan with keeping in mind the most strict requirements of all of that. And again, I do welcome feedback to this. I know that it's not perfect, it's in development, but certainly, you know, if people feel differently, I'm open for suggestion to it. The root of the water testing really started with the LCCA, which was enacted in 1988. And then that basically laid the groundwork for the LCR, which has been the testing that's been required up until October, where it was changed to the LCRR, which is the Lead and Copper Rule Revision, which there's a few more requirements in that new revision that we have to follow. And I'll get into those in a little bit. The biggest things that are in the plan, so the LCRR and the LCR, which were the previous action items that we had to follow, there was no change in the requirements of the action levels or the maximum containment level goal. The action level for lead is 15 parts per billion or less. That has not changed, neither has the copper requirement of 1.3 parts per million. So that's good news for us, and we'll get into some of the testing results, and we'll talk about that when I get to that point of the presentation. So where are we at today? So I haven't just been spending my time writing the plan. There's really a lot that goes into this. So we went through, you know, I've talked about the commitment to safety. That's just going to be echoed through this entire presentation, even beyond, right? I'll work with Eric and Janelle, and we'll try and get some stuff out in some of the newsletters that go out so that people are aware this plan exists and that we're taking this very seriously. You know, we understand the action levels now after going through doing the research that was required. Training plans. So what's really nice is that the EPA and DEP both have really good resources that we can lean on for training to send out to the members of the public, faculty, parents, students. A good example of that's the 3 T's, and that's what a lot of this plan was built on, which is training, testing, and taking action. So a lot of really good resources that we'll be able to build on and be able to provide. Where we are right now in this is, you can't really see it's cut off, but we're on that part that's circled, which is the identifying testing locations and fixtures. And I wish I could say that this was going fast. It's not. So every single fixture in the district, I have to go around and measure or assign a number to, a very unique identification code. And if a fixture is hot and cold, both sides of that need to be labeled. So I'm at the high school now. I'm at 100 fixtures, and I'm not even close to done. So I'm hoping when I do complete the high school, we'll start getting the testing going there. I'm not going to wait to do everything. We'll do everything in parallel efforts so that we'll get some data we can act on. So that's where we're at. Just another note, this plan does not replace anything that the towns are currently doing. So the towns are going to continue to do their LCCA testing that they're required to do. And obviously, if items come up out of those, we'll action those. If anything, I look at this as like to supplement that, and obviously as our requirements that we have to follow. So. All right, so last school committee meeting that I was present at, there was some talk about some of the testing that was done. I apologize, the exhibit that had gone out previous to today had some information that was wrong. You know, I made the joke to Eric earlier, this is why I'm in facilities, I'm not one of the teachers here. So I failed to move a decimal point a couple places. The good news about that is that of the testing that I've seen and reviewed the data for, we don't have any lead that's above an action level. So the EPA classifies at 15 parts per billion or greater as a health threat. In the same language, they say that it could be a health threat for anything less than 15 parts per billion. So while we don't have anything that's above that action level, we do have plenty of data to support the goal that we need to be working towards, which is zero lead in our water. So, which brings me to my next point. There were some concerns I had about the testing based off my research that I have done thus far. Testing methodology was one of the issues that I had. So according to the EPA, we're supposed to do a first draw and a flush draw. So first draw is taken it's between 8 hours and 18 hours. That window is when we're supposed to be doing the testing. That was not documented anywhere if that had been done. The first draw is the immediate first hit. You take off the tap, you let the water run for 30 seconds, and then you take your flush draw. I don't know with what was provided from the data if the flush draw those are the numbers we're seeing, if the first draw is what we're seeing, or if it's a combination. So that was one issue I saw. Not all fixtures have been tested. So when I went through the data, it looks like everything that's been tested has been in kitchens. We have done some bubblers, but it doesn't specify exactly what bubbler or what fixture was done. That's why the numbering is so important. Each fixture needs to have a unique number. So I'm not sure exactly which fixtures were done. There are certified labs we're supposed to use, according to the DEP. Massachusetts has a whole list of them that we can send this stuff off to. And I'm not sure if any of those were used. Chain of custody on the samples, I'm not sure how that occurred or if who had handled our samples. And the other big one is testing 100% of the fixtures has not been done every 3 years, according to what I have. Now, talking to some of the people walking around the schools, like the nurses and some of the principals, they do recall back prior to COVID, this testing occurring on a more frequent basis. So this might just be an exercise of us to return to normal, and I hate to even say that in 2025. But certainly, I think that's probably where we need to go with this. With that being said, I don't think any of the data we have thus far isn't something that we shouldn't be actioning or haven't actioned. I do know a number of fixtures throughout the district have been replaced. We put in new water bottle fill stations, new fixtures in the kitchens have been done. So my recommendation here is not necessarily to ignore any of the readings we have so far. I think what we should be doing is rebaselining. So as part of the plan I'm proposing, every year we're going to do a third of the fixtures. So by year 4, we're going back through the cycle. As part of this first year of testing, any of the fixtures that I believe were tested or were suspect will be retested. And so we'll ensure if there was mitigation that it was effective. If not, we'll come back to that and deal with that quickly.
Curtis, it looks like you've got a question.
Yeah, sure.
When you do the every 3 years whole system testing, are you going to do it a school at a time?
I'll do it across the district, so it'll be a district-wide. Yeah, I don't want to just do one school. I think we need to.
I
Yeah.
100%
Yeah,
agree with
yeah,
you,
absolutely.
but that's
Yeah,
why I asked.
that's a good question. So some of the changes that I can quickly discuss about the new LCRR testing, and I apologize, I should say LCRR in that third line there, is we need to verify that all the service lines to the schools have been either replaced or are not lead. Now, talking to Eric, talking to Vinny, I believe that's already been done. I just need to seek objective evidence to that. So I discovered this, I'm not even joking, 2 days ago. So beyond that, there is some other tight requirements under the new LCRR for training, for notification that we will certainly be following. So there may be some more changes to the plan as the days ahead go. The biggest thing, again, is the transparency part of this, the publication of this. I think this should be available to members of the public, schools, faculty, parents. Yeah, that's pretty much the bones of this thing. I don't know if there are any other questions.
Oh, I had a quick question on the very last
Sure.
point there. The service lines, those lines that you're talking about would be like the lines from the town, right?
That's right.
That coming into the
Yep.
school. Okay. All right, thank you.
Excellent presentation. Really appreciate the detail that went into it. and I think that you've laid out a great plan. Could you just review for me the approach to moving through the schools over time? Because you said you're at the high school right now.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that the lead was detected at Winthrop. So what would be the time frame to get to Winthrop?
Yeah, so the problem I'm having right now is the labeling of the fixtures. So I'm not gonna go, I'm gonna go one school at a time to label them. Certainly Winthrop will be one I'll stop at next. I should finish up the high school this week, so.
Okay, so Winthrop is happening in the near present.
It'll really be a question of how long it's gonna take to get the test results after that point, so. I've already engaged a vendor that works with certified labs. They have the certified EPA number. So they're willing to work with us. It's someone we currently use, so it'll be pretty quick once we're ready to rock and roll.
And then I remember looking through the report, there were past positive lead results
That's
at
right.
other
That's
schools.
right. Yeah, so it's not just Winthrop. So we had, interestingly enough here, Bucher, back in September this year, or last year, we had lead detected. 1.1 parts per billion below the LCR, but it's not zero. So we're gonna be seeking that zero everywhere we go. Testing that was done at Bucher back in April, which was performed by the district-wide, showed no lead here. So it's interesting how, in that short of time, how things could have changed. So you'd think,
Do you think that's because we're just testing different sources?
yeah, I mean, there are multiple fixtures in the kitchen. They could have just gone to a different fixture, which is why I think it's important to make sure when we're testing that we use the prescribed numbering system that we're supposed to be using so that there's no question of what it is. The metal labels that are at the bottom of all the laptops that we've been given are what I'm gonna be using. It'll be barcoded, so, you know, if I hit the lottery and end up leaving, the next guy can come in, or anybody could come in and use the barcoding system, and it'll always be there, so, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Are there any other questions?
Other questions? Does Julia have a question? Julia, do you have any questions?
Oh, she's okay.
No, okay.
No, thank you. Everyone else covered my questions.
So, just in summary, there is some additional resources that are on this PowerPoint that we can look at. These are a lot of the ones that I have referenced. So if you want to learn more about the lead copper rule revision, feel free to
Exciting
peruse.
reading.
Well, I appreciate the
Thank
committee's
you.
time. Thank you.
Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
Thank you, Curtis. This is one of the things that I think having Curtis here full-time has been able to kind of grab the bull by the horns, whereas 6 months ago, I was like, all right, who's going to deal with this right now between Vinny, myself, and there was no one in the position. So I appreciate having Curtis here. I appreciate his action when we met after some discussions with some of the committee members. We met and immediately he went to work, came up with this, put together the presentation. I think the plan is excellent. I think, you know, the hard part in a small school district is just as I end up doing these weird jobs, Curtis is going to end up doing these weird jobs of labeling all the fixtures, but that first time through should be the last time through, hopefully, as
Yeah.
long as nobody peels off the labels. But
That's right.
yeah, but at least we'll have it barcoded, and it should be a system that's a little bit more.
You think at an elementary school, there's going to be a
Yeah,
problem with
that's what
peeling off
I
labels?
was. We were talking about places to stick them so
Yeah.
that people couldn't see them. you
That's
know?
right. Yeah, we gonna be hiding an additional one under the fixture, just in case.
Fake one. Gotta put a
Is-
dummy one right
Yeah,
next
yeah.
to it.
My son goes here to Bucher, and I know him very well, and he will definitely be peeling those off. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dana, before we go on, just apropos to this, I'd like to make a motion. I move that the school committee charge the policy committee to develop a district policy for informing the school committee in a timely fashion of identified environmental or health risks.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, let me try to restate the motion to make sure that I understood.
I was gonna say, I think we actually have something like that already on.
So, well, let's just go through the process. So my understanding of the motion, tell me if I'm getting it right, is that the motion is to have the school committee task the policy subcommittee with creating policy around water testing reporting to the school committee.
No, this is just around the school committee's policy for the for informing the committee, informing the committee in a timely fashion of an identified health or environmental risk.
Okay,
Yeah. So it's really just about identifying, like, what is the school committee's expectation around when we're identified after it is developed and how we're identified.
okay, so the motion is really around tasking the policy subcommittee with creating policy language about informing the school committee when there is, oh my gosh. it's
Identified
lost.
health risk.
Identified health risk, thank you.
Right.
And identified.
Yes, I'm good with that.
All right, so questions, discussion?
I have a question. What do you say in a timely fashion? Is that 1 week, 2 weeks?
Well, that's what I hope the policy subcommittee is going to tell us, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Don't worry about it. We'll take care of it.
Mike,
I wasn't sure if you had, I know you work in the field, so I wasn't sure if you knew.
No,
some
you know,
guidelines.
I think that I love the report that we just saw.
Yeah.
And, you know, I know that we've had, you know, turnover in that position, but I think that if we, you know, just have a clear expectation of what the, you know, if it's identified, you know, how are we going to be informed, and then at what point in time is public going to be informed in a meeting?
Yeah,
I think that'd be very helpful.
like I said, I think it's, I think there is something like that on the books currently, and as long as I've been here, excuse me, I feel that we've always been, you know, definitely kept up to date with anything that's come by. But, you know, when stuff comes like policy here, it's not necessarily for the people in the room. I always think about it when none of us are at the table, right? And how do we continue to make sure that the work that's currently going on and the reports we're currently getting, right? So I, you know, definitely like
so
that idea to, you know,
I guess
that you're just sort of putting in what is a timely manner. All right, well, within, you know, 2 days or so of, you know, letting us know what the plan is, and because, you know, word travels fast, and hey, what's this I heard about lead in Winthrop? You know.
So I guess I don't want, because I do have a question very specifically about sort of procedure question is, I think for me, if I had made the motion, in spirit, I am in agreement that this would be a good thing to have in policy, but to what David just said, I'm wondering, I guess what I would be looking for, if I had made the motion, would be to have policy, review our policies, see what we already have, and then come back to us either with new language or a recommendation. Like, I think, I'm curious about whether policy might say, we actually already have a policy that we feel covers this, or we'd like you as the school committee to say, do you think this policy already covers it well?
I'm
That would
hearing
be-
like a friendly amendment.
You know, I don't know, that's my
No, I think
concern
that's
is
part of, but I hear what you're saying, and I think that's sort of part of the process. 'Cause
Yeah.
If we go through and we actually look for it and we find something that's already there, like, okay, well, here's something, bring it for a first reading, is this a strong enough policy, get the feedback from the committee, and. you know,
Yeah, I
just
guess
let the
that's all,
process
that's
do
all
it.
I'm saying. I don't want policy to create a new policy if,
It's already there.
I would trust the subcommittee, and I think Trent was saying that too, that to trust the subcommittee to go through the process and decide, like, so, and maybe that's fine, maybe the motion, the way it is, that policy
ensure
would
that it's
feel free to
addressed,
come
yeah.
back and say,
I feel comfortable that I understand what he's looking for.
Yeah.
Me too, yeah.
So,
all right, and
and if I wasn't
policy is
lazy, I'd
the
start
two-
looking it up, but.
plus,
Jen,
Oh,
David,
Jen.
and I, yes.
okay. I was just trying to remember who's on policy. All right, we have do other people have questions? We have a motion, it's been seconded. Anybody have any other questions?
No.
Okay, so the motion would be, I'm going to try again, even though I've struggled with it. Basically, to task policy with creating policy language around reporting back when there is an identified health risk.
Not quite, right?
I can
Close.
try again.
It's close.
I don't know if I'll get it. So I move that the school committee task the policy subcommittee to develop a policy that outlines the committee's expectations for being made aware in a timely fashion any identified health risks in the schools.
Thank you. Okay. Everybody clear? Thank you for that.
As long as Beverly's clear.
Yeah, no, I
It's good.
don't know. I feel like I usually am able to do it, but somehow.
Love it.
Okay. All right, David Polito,
Yes.
Amy,
Yes.
Trent,
Yes.
Jen,
Yes.
Julia,
Yes.
Dana's a yes, and the motion passes of the 6 members, unanimously of the 6 members present. So, and then we'll look to policy at the next meeting to hear like when you have scheduled to take that on.
Will do.
Okay. All right. Next up, Eric, do you want to speak to this? This is the budget and annual report. It's the budget book. It's
Just pop it back up on the screen here. There it is. Annually, once Vinnie completes the budget process and the committee votes on the budget, we create this book that we make available to the public that really outlines the entire budget process, the budget itself, and some other tidbits that are built in. So this is similar to what we've done every year, including things that are kind of basic, like our vision and mission statement, some introductory letters from myself, from Dana. We lay out the budget calendar and then go through each of the steps for the operating budget, the capital finance budget, elementary, we break it down by elementary and secondary. We look at district-wide programs, and then key indicators at the end. And this gets published and made available both at online, in town halls, both town halls, and then the public library, senior centers. We distribute it around the community as well. So.
all right, and you would be looking for a motion to approve
Just approve it, yeah.
this. Correct. David, would you be willing to start us off with a motion?
Sure. I move the Hamilton Wenham School Committee vote to approve the FY26 budget annual report as presented in tonight's agenda.
Second.
Second by Jen Carr. Anyone have questions? Is there discussion? All right. Looks like we're ready to vote. Is Julia there? Julia?
Julia stepped off for a second.
Okay. David Polito?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Trent?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Dana's a yes. Julia?
Julia is off.
So that is 5 yeses and,
One abstention.
Here's Julia.
oh, yeah. Julia, are you there?
Oh, she's putting
Oh,
her
she's
piece
putting
back
her-
in. Julia, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear.
Okay, we just need your vote on the
Sorry.
budget and annual report.
Okay, what was the motion?
Motion was to approve the FY
approve it?
'26 budget and annual report, and it was seconded by Jen Carr.
Okay, yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, and so that is 6-0, and the motion passes unanimously of the members present. All right, next up to you, Eric. This is some information on the Cutler MCAS analysis.
Thank you. I pitch this back to Trent. Trent and I have been going back and forth on this. He requested that we put it on an agenda. We were going to put it on last meeting, but it was packed, so we moved it to this meeting. I just wanted to make sure it was on it. He had requested it a couple meetings back. So this is the updated version of what was presented back in, I think, October, when the schools did their school improvement reports. This is a more in-depth look at it, so we wanted to put it here, and I don't know if you want to speak to it.
No, I really appreciate you doing this. I was wondering if you would be able to talk about the process that went into it.
Yeah, so the initial process was done during the summer when the new principal came on board. She and Jen Clifford, the director of teacher and learning, and I went through data once the information was released from the state. And everybody's seen that data, and it's not where we want it to be, so we started to dig into the data and look at some of the things that reflected reasons why. We created a very generic list, which was an earlier compilation of this, which was really, these are the things that we're looking at when we're looking at Cutler student achievement. Why are they falling below the levels of the other elementary schools? And we dug into that, built it into the school improvement planning process for the principal to present. Part of that conversation at the beginning of the school year was really talking to teachers and meeting with teachers. We met with the teachers on their first day of faculty meetings, which was during the first 4 days before school started. And we literally presented all this data to them, and then we started talking to different people through the district and gathering information, which is how we got to the school improvement plan. And then that's when you had asked for a little more detail on the report, if you will, and that's where this came about.
I appreciate that. So I really find the trajectory in the MCAS data that was presented concerning for multiple years at Cutler. And it looks to me like a lot of the identified issues here are related to kind of administrative decisions that occurred at the school. Those administrative decisions happened over what period of time? Do you know?
The previous administration to the current, so last year's administration, that person was here for 2 years. All the elementary schools work together, so the 3 principals meet consistently. Usually, like tomorrow, they will meet. They go through the process and say, okay, this is how we're going to address this. This is how we're address this. And if you go back to that time, we were just kicking off CKLA, and there were agreements made between the administrators to say these things would happen. And going back and talking to the other administrators, several of those things did not happen. And as you look at this, there are things that are important to the process, like helping kids understand just the testing environment, giving kids the opportunity to get on a computer in 3rd grade, see what the testing environment looks like, try to understand how to manipulate the tools. That happened in 2 out of the 3 schools. So we started having those conversations with individuals like support personnel, teachers, people who are doing our assessment, managing our assessments and our interventions, and that really started to kind of point us in the direction of there's a consistency here that's related to management decisions that were made by administrators, agreed upon by all 3, but not consistently followed through.
So I guess my follow-up question for that is, it looks like a lot of the things here are prospective, things that are going to be implemented. So if we step back in time, were any of these issues identified before the most recent year and acted upon with the prior administration?
Not at the level we have now. Not at the level we had now. The previous would have been really 1 year of quote data where there was the same person was responsible at that time. So once we looked at that data set, that's the one we responded to currently, because the new principal just came in this past summer.
Okay. So I guess like what I'm trying to get to is like, is there a hole in the process that would be, is there a way of looking at this and saying like there's an improvement that can be made in the process of like the issue that was identified sounds like by, you know, the entire faculty over there and administration was prior administration. So if we had a time machine and went back in time, what would be the process that would catch it before we had, you know, the real sharp downturn that we saw in the last year?
The hard part is we respond to the data that comes late. So you get testing that occurs that starts in March, testing in March, testing in May, testing in June. We don't get the results until August, that's when we respond. We start to see the results mid-August from the state. And that's what happened here. We had 1 year of data, we knew it was shaky, we were waiting on second year of data, saying that, okay, these are the things that these principals have agreed upon, this is a new curriculum that's in place, these are technology pieces we put in place, like typing programs. Some of those things didn't happen at the Cutler School, reflected in the second year of down data, which is how we responded. That's how we got to this point.
No, I hear you, but I'm just looking at it like, for example, the Cutler ELA. If we look at the total, like it has been a downward trend since 2021.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
If we look at students with disabilities, it's an abysmally downward trend.
Mhm.
With Cutler math grades, it's, you know, was a downward trade from 2019, 2021, stayed down, where the other schools were going up.
Yep.
And then again, students with disabilities, it went down appreciably. The only one that's kind of a sine wave that doesn't seem to have a specific trend other than the last year was really far down was science. So I look at that and say like, is there some other metric other than the individual data point? Like I look at the trend of science at Bucher, and it's going up the entire look-back period.
Yep.
Right? So I want us in the future to not be, you know, with 5 years of data pointing in one direction. So that's where I ask, like, is there a hole in the process that can be addressed?
Yeah, I don't believe there is. I mean, we just finished up this week meeting with each of the principals. Instead of doing our walkthroughs, we did mid-year data reviews where, if you go back to the school improvement planning, we sat with them and said, okay, go back to your gap closing strategies. These are the things that you put in place at the beginning of the year. Are they working? Tell us why or how there may not be. What adjustments have you made with your staff? What types of things have you talked about with your staff through faculty meetings, individual meetings, individual classroom observation, through the evaluative process? We hadn't done that in the past. This is like, now we're more in depth than ever, meeting with the principals, having these conversations about instructional leadership and developing that process through all three schools. So this year would be very different than previous years. Just in the level of looking at data, we spent with each of the schools this week, we sat with all 5 principals individually. Jen, Clifford, and I sat down, looked at their data, which is what I reviewed, Dibble's data across the elementary schools, iReady data across the secondary, and then kind of came to them with, okay, here's what the data sets are, here's what they're showing us, talk about your gap closing strategies. Some of our gap closing strategies are related to individual buildings, others are related to subgroups across our Student Opportunity Act requirements. They tend to be similar, usually Ls, low income, and kids with disabilities. So that's been our focus for this year.
So I love the description of the process. I guess the crux of my question is like, for the past 2 years, did that same process occur in
No.
a documented
Nope.
fashion? So
Not at that level.
That seems to me like maybe that is the gap that you are actively filling with the change that's made this year.
With the change, yeah, absolutely, because I came in 21, we did a whole year of kind of checking it out, listening, figuring out, growing, learning. 22, we kicked in. 23, 24 is when we really started to dig in with CKLA. That was the second full year of CKLA, which is where we started with literacy. And then this year, we kicked off with math. So we have these processes where we're meeting with, we have a consulting group for math that meets with our elementary coaches and the principals to talk about things like what's happening in the classroom, what are some of the things they're actually doing classroom observations with our coaches and administrators, and then bringing it back and running through a process of examining the data. Okay, what is it telling us and how are we going to respond to it? So we're at a very different level by jumping in with this group TNTP, which was something offered to us by the state that we took advantage of. So those things are new this year. They absolutely are.
So, sorry, not to interrupt Trent, but
Please.
I think to what Trent, what I'm hearing Trent saying, and one thing that sort of is glaring to me in this process is when you're relying on these, annual testing data points, right? You have to wait to get to the results back to
Right.
realize that you're steering the ship in the wrong direction. As I look at this report, the glaring thing for me is the technology used. It seems that there's a lot sort of pointing towards this and why we think that the students didn't test well because the administration didn't encourage technology use for teachers. Now, if you're meeting with a new principal, once a month and saying, excuse me, she's going to go in there and sell her points, well, we're not concentrating on the technology because we're doing X, Y, and Z, and she's going to be pushing her agenda, which she believes in, and she's taking that to school and direction in. And meanwhile, so it all sounds well and good, but meanwhile, as we, get this comparative data back to be testing against other students in the district and, across this Commonwealth, we're realizing that this class is now behind everybody else. And, so what I sort of see, and correct me if I'm wrong, Trent, is what are we doing to figure that out before we get the MCAS results to realize, like, oops, we made a mistake?
Right. And that's part of the conversation I was just having about the DIBELS data, mid-year reviews, working with the TNTP people, and really digging in. They have data meetings now at each of the grade levels. They have PLCs, which are new for each of the grade level groups, so that they're not only digging into the data, but learning together about, okay, what are some of the changes that we can make along the way? What are some of the adjustments that we can make? What are some of the focal points? So we have people that are specifically looking at the data points for each of our elementary age kids and honing in on very specific interventions that are needed at ground level, what's going on in the classrooms, which is our LAC program. The LAC program, we have a coordinator who is managing the data and working with the coaches and the principals to determine the intervention schedules, and then each of these intervention processes are occurring at the kid level individually. So they're working with 1, 2, and 3 kids to focus on points that the data that we're getting out of our DIBELS and our iReady data is being worked on now and not later. So not after the fact. We're trying to intervene now. One of the weak points that we're learning about as we've gone through these data meetings with our principals is the gap, closing of the gap. Your kids on the low side of the gap can't just make average gains. They need to make above average gains for the gap to close, because your kids on your upper end are still making average or higher than average gains. So part of the conversation is how do we help to accelerate that for those kids who are in these, on the lower side of the gap, or in these subgroups like our L's. So in looking at our L data to this point in the year, they are, in the words of the principal, blowing it away. They are really picking up speed in a place where they wouldn't have last year because we didn't have that same type of focus. We have an individual now working in the classroom. We put a lot more specialty people in the classroom. The Cutler and the Bucher qualify for Title I services, so each of them has a math intervention specialist that is specifically doing math interventions, and then all of the elementary schools have some type of an LAC program, which it's run by the coach and the LACTAs, who are all doing individual work with kids. So up until last year was really the first year we really had it moving and cooking, and this year it's kind of flowing much more smoothly across the process. So when you're looking at evaluations, for example, principal evaluation, and you say, okay, the instructional leadership needs improvement. So that's my tool as a superintendent to say, here's how I need to drive improvement on the instructional leadership side. That's part of the process. It's not the public part of the process, but it's part of the process of how we try to keep people moving forward.
I appreciate the explanation. I do think that your strategy of identifying data points that are more proximal and less delayed, that correlate well, is sound. I don't mean to just, go back to it. I am concerned about the process not catching this earlier. I am, because I look at, the root cause analysis identified really an administrative issue at the school in several different ways. And, I think that the administrative lead of the school is the principal, and the principals report directly to you, is my understanding. And so I think that the solution that you've outlaid is great. I would love to see it as a district, problem improvement policy or something, so that, again, people, process, not people, right? When these folks aren't in this room, if there's a problem that's identified, and, everybody is a different person in this role, that we know how we measure our success or failure in real time as opposed to delayed time. Anyway,
I think that's the advantage we have now. So when I took over in '21, there was, at that time, two interim principals. There were two people sharing the position.
When did Jen?
So then 22, 23, 23, 24, which is a window of time we're talking about right now, that was a new principal in 22, 23, came back in 23, 24, and then kind of left near the end of the year, but finished out. And then now a new principal again, so that change is also part of the problem, I believe, the leadership shift over and over and over. So you go back even before that, COVID time, when Jen Clifford was the principal, then you had two interim principals, then you had a new principal who stayed for another year and then was gone to start another school, and then you have a new principal again who's now got to get up to speed. That actually adds a detail in there that makes it, in my opinion, more important for us to be in the schools more often than not. So we're in the Cutler School quite often doing walkthroughs, which is part of our process of evaluating and understanding. We have a process of keeping up with pacing across the district. So what are the first grade teachers doing across the district? Where are they at pacing? So the coaches do that work. They are using that information to they may have to go to a teacher and say, hey, listen, you're 2 units behind, what's going on? And then work with that teacher to figure out what's happening, whether it's an issue with the understanding or process or whatever. So all of those things are relatively new over the past 2 years, last year and this year, as we built up this MTSS structure out of my first year of kind of listening and learning about all the things that were going on.
So would you be able to provide the school committee with what the process is for when something like this is identified that you've just built this year? You've built this real-time evaluation process, right?
Yeah.
I think that would be excellent to be able to have, and then it's something that could be repeated, down the line.
Yeah. What we do is usually at the end of last year, we did a presentation of the school committee of the data and the processes along the way. So we would do that again. Because we want to look at a full year's data where we do 3 points across the year. But we're also doing kind of checks along the way, if you will, so progress monitoring for kids all along the way. So it's not just kind of one stop. It is one stop, check in, one stop. Some kids, they made their gains, they move out of the process, and some kids get pulled into the process, so there's always kind of that ebb and flow. But yeah, we can definitely do that. Absolutely.
I think that'd be great.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've been dominating.
Yeah, I mean, part of the problem is you're looking at 5 years of data. After COVID, everybody dropped. It didn't matter what school you were at, what grade you were at, everybody's MCAS scores dropped across the board. So I think part of the reason this wasn't identified sooner is separating out what's an administrative issue and what's a lingering COVID issue was hard until we saw a pattern of Bucher and Winthrop going up and Cutler not. That made it, I think, a lot harder to identify the problem as an
Yeah, but I mean,
administrative
it's
issue.
tough because then you're looking at it, right? So as I'm sitting here thinking, about how much change has really went over those past couple of years, right? We rolled through 3 superintendents in 3 years as well, right? Excuse me, just sort of all the switching of positions there. I'm sitting there looking at it like, okay, why do we get it right 66% of the time and not 100, right? Because we did okay with 2 of the 3 elementary schools. We didn't with the 3rd, right? And so it should be concerning, and we should really be reassessing. The worst part of education is also the best part, right? It's like we learn from our mistakes. You don't want to make a mistake because it's kids that we're making, you know what I mean? They're sort of, at the end of the day, this isn't just data. This is kids that are now behind that we have to catch up, and as you're going through this process, I don't, like, oh, well, this gap still continues because everyone moves forward. I'm like, oh, I don't care about the gap. I don't care about the MCAS data. I care about the actual kids are getting what they need, and so, excuse me, as unfortunately, you're in the position where you get the brunt of, we made a mistake here, but, I also take it very personally ourselves. I go, okay, we have to do better, right? We're all here for the kids, so we all have to do better and make sure that we're identifying this in a more real-time basis. Excuse me. So this really helps. In Trent, your line of questioning has really helped me sort of think about this on that deeper level, so thank you for that also.
I think it's important to note that previous to me, there weren't a lot of moves made with issues that were not good. So some of that stuff lingered. We're looking at it from not only last year, this year, we're also looking at next year. When we look at this data and we start to say, is this an occurrence at a grade level? Is this an occurrence at a classroom level? Where are these things happening? And we're very willing to take those issues on, whereas in the past probably hasn't happened because of the change in leadership. You're like new principal, you're coming in, you're building your culture, and next thing you know, you're starting to have to confront an individual about what may or may not be going in their classroom. It's part of the job, and that's the expectation. But there's a fine balance there in your first year. The second year, okay, now you do that. So these are the conversations we're having now with principals. Okay, we're looking at this data. Tell me about this classroom. What are the things that are different in this classroom? Here's what we see in classroom observations. How does that correlate, or does it not correlate? So these are the conversations we've been having just this week in talking with our principals about the gap closing strategies and how they relate to even the new implementation of our math program. What's that look like? Where are people? And it's tough. The first year of any curriculum is hard, especially with teachers who've seen things. It's the first time they see it. They're kind of working through it. The second year, so when we did the second year of CKLA, the first year of CKLA, people were like, I can't do this. I can't keep up. Second year, it was like, okay, I got it now, and I got the gist of how it works. And then we started seeing that smooth out a little bit more, and that's where I think you started to see the implementation across the 3 schools. Some of the things that you see are very explainable based on the fact that the comfort level of some of the teachers with the materials, they were just kind of in the groove and got it and understood it, and others still needed more coaching, and that's part of this process that we've built through the past 3 years. So.
Well, and it sounds like your first point under collaboration and coordination was that the principals as a group were making good decisions.
Yep.
But then the principal at Cutler just decided, well, I'm just going to do my own thing.
There was no follow through, right?
Yeah. That's my major concern. How do we prevent that from happening again?
Right, which is why we're meeting with them so much more often.
Right.
The part of that is we're meeting with them at their building to say, show us. So when we go to a building, we'll say to a principal, what are we going to see today? And they'll say, we're going to see second grade, CKLA, and this is what they're working on. So we all have the access to the curriculum. We'll go through that with the principal. We'll go back and really have this whole conversation about the principal. What did you see? What have you seen? What are the consistencies? What are the inconsistencies? So those conversations have not happened up until this, starting last year and this year. I think those are a big deal when you're looking at, changing a culture and changing a belief system about what kids can or cannot do. And that's been, you go back to when I was the principal of the high school, the first thing I had to wrestle with was believing that there was not two different groups of kids, those kids and these kids. They were all of our kids, and changing that mindset of saying they're all of ours, we're all responsible for that. So it's the same type of an approach, like, okay, make sure everybody believes that these kids can all do it. Bring in the materials. We've given them really strong materials, research-based materials. We brought in both last year and this year, support systems from the state. This year is TNTP, and they're a group that comes out several times a month. They meet with our coaches and our principals. They also walk through and sit in classrooms. They do observations. They give us feedback. That feedback is turned into action steps. Those action steps then. So I will outline that for the committee. I think it's important that you see the bigger picture of what this has grown into since when we started it 3 years ago. So it's an important piece of the puzzle.
I again, appreciate you putting the effort into this. And the only additional request I would make, and I don't know if it's to you, Dana, is the MCAS accountability report is a item that's up on the website, but it's on the November 7th agenda. Is it possible to link it to this agenda just so that there's context related to the
It's a good question. Not really, because this agenda was posted as this, and we can't really add things.
It could be part of the minutes.
Yes, it could be, yes, it
We
could
could
be,
make it part
it
of
could be
the
in the
minutes,
minutes, yes, right.
Yeah.
In other words, we wouldn't, the procedural reason is you wouldn't want it to look like it was on, that people would have seen it ahead of time, because that didn't happen, so, does that make sense?
Gotcha.
But I do
Now
agree
we
that
gotta
that would
remember
be
to check the minutes.
helpful information, so.
Note to self.
Yes, but it certainly could be included in the minutes as something that was referenced, and with a, like, that could be done. Yeah, and it could have been exhibit, put it on, we could have done that, and that might have been a helpful thing to put on as the exhibit. I didn't think of it.
I think as long as they're in some way, linked so that there's context to the discussion, it's helpful.
Thank you. All right, does anybody have anything else on that?
Did you say it was November 7th?
November 7th.
So, no.
Okay, so next up, the agenda item says superintendent evaluation procedures and dates. I ask for all of you to kind of I'm asking you to basically pull out your calendars, and what I'd like to do here is just have a real discussion about, like I said, procedures and dates. So when are we gonna get the evidence from the superintendent? When are the evaluations gonna be done? Who is we're gonna submit them to? What date we're gonna vote on them? I have suggested dates, but I am gonna ask, I'm gonna sort of present what my thoughts are. We can have a discussion, and then I am gonna ask for a couple of votes so that it's clear that we've all made a decision about all of these things. As you all know, one of the functions of the school committee is to annually review and evaluate the superintendent. And I'll just tell you, I worked backwards so that we would be able to have a vote on the compiled evaluation in June. So I'm going to just, if you guys really literally don't mind pulling out your calendar so that you can hear what I'm saying. What I'm looking at, and again, this is just me thinking, it's all open for discussion, but I was looking at Eric providing his final summative evidence by April 17th, which we have a school committee meeting on April 17th. And again, these are just dates that I picked. You guys can, we have a school committee meeting on May 1st. I was looking to be having members submit their evaluations either by that May 1st school committee meeting, or if people wanted another weekend, maybe we could make the deadline May 5th. That would allow a couple of weeks for compilation, then we have a school committee meeting on May 15th where we could review the draft, and then we would have an opportunity at the final, 2 weeks later, on June 5th for a final vote. I know that was a lot of dates, but I don't know what people think about that.
Makes sense.
Thoughts?
I like the idea of the 5th as the due date.
Me too.
Okay, all right, and I,
What, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
He likes the idea of the 5th as a due
right,
date.
to have the weekend.
Okay.
Yes.
I do too.
Yes, and I, actually, that was my note. I actually have that written down and said, because I think that's the feedback I've gotten in past years, is that people like to have a weekend there. So those were a lot of dates. Just to be clear, we also have some other things we need to decide around. I'm going to just sort of say a bunch of things, and you guys can decide how we want to organize any votes. Typically, what we've done for the past several years is that because we have an election on April 10th, so if a member were to depart the committee on April 10th, they would, in the past, what we've decided to do is that they would only be able to speak to anything that occurs before that date. So obviously, it's a small window of time, but if there was something that, a report or an incident or something that occurred that, whatever, good or bad, that they wouldn't actually be able to speak to that incident if it occurred after they had left the committee. Again, this is just throwing out what's happened in the past. We in the past have not invited newly elected members to be invited in to write an evaluation. They would be elected on April 10th. It's nearly the end of the year, so in the past, we've not invited them in. Again, open for discussion. We've also, in the past, invited, if a member were to have no longer be on the committee, we have typically invited those members to come back and participate in the discussion of the evaluation, but as they are no longer members of the committee, they would not be able to vote. So that was a lot of thoughts. I don't know if anyone wants to throw out anything on that, all those thoughts.
I mean, I don't really have anything to add. I think that has worked really well in the past. I think it makes sense that somebody who has been newly elected and only been on the committee for a few weeks as of the time, or I guess 4 weeks, as of the time when something is due, it's not really enough info to write the evaluation. So I like this plan.
Okay. Other people, thoughts? We all know there's one more decision too, which is that we do need to decide, once we decide on all the dates and sort of the rules about, whether elected when the election, who can write, we also have to decide who gets to do the compilation, and that would also be who we would all be submitting those to on the due date, which tentatively we're saying May 5th. I don't know if anyone's enthusiastically volunteering to do that job.
I have a question.
Sure.
When is the compiled report due?
May 15th.
15th.
Okay.
Well, it would need to be, if it's on the May 15th agenda, it actually would need to be,
The 12th at the latest.
yeah, the
12th,
12th.
Monday,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You could get away with the 12th.
Yeah, so that it could be posted so that people could review it.
If I'm here, I don't mind doing it. Got a system at this point.
Right, and it's actually, it is a valid concern, is that we have 3 members who are up in a contested election. So,
Never not been in a contested election.
so I don't know whether that impacts wanting to delegate someone who
Is not in that position.
may or may not be, but on the other hand, we could always pick someone else afterwards.
Theoretically, if the outgoing person can still write, then can they still compile or no?
I mean,
Shady.
could, but we wouldn't have anything to compel them to do so,
That's true.
so.
I'm gone.
I think it,
Pressing,
I'm just trying to throw it out there. So I heard David say that he might be willing to do that compilation.
I would definitely, but yeah, I don't mind doing that.
I don't know if anyone else is jumping at doing it. I know that you've done it in the past. I've done it in the past.
If something weird happens with the election, I can take it over from David.
So do we need a motion or like a nomination?
I do think, so I think I actually do want to take a couple of votes. I don't want to take too long on this, but I do want to take some, I think they're probably easiest to do just as separate votes. I do think we need a vote on who's going to do the compilation. I do also want to vote about the dates that we talked about, just so that it's really clear. And then I will, of course, send out an email, just so that everybody knows. But I do want it, I want it to be something that we've actually voted on. So I don't know, David, if you want to make a motion on the dates, or do you want me to read the dates?
I think I have the dates correct.
Okay.
Right? Actually, so superintendent superintendent summaries due April 17th. It's summary?
Yeah, summative evidence.
Summative data.
To have the school committee's eval by May 5th.
Yep,
The individual.
the individuals. Yep.
I'm writing initials that I'm not going to get. And then to complete the draft by May 15th, by May 12th.
Yeah.
Mhm.
For May 15th meeting. All right, I think I can do this. My writing is terrible. Excuse me. I moved that the Hamilton Wenham Regional School Committee approve the dates for the superintendent evaluation as follows. The superintendent summative, excuse me, to be due on April 17th. The school committee's individual evaluation submittals by May 5th. And the compilation draft to be submitted by May 12th for the May 15th meeting, school committee meeting date discussion.
Second.
By Amy Kumberger. Are there any questions or comments on that?
Just going over my head if it made sense, but you guys
No, that
all
was
said
great.
otherwise.
All right, looks like we're ready for a vote. Julia?
Yes.
Jen?
Yes.
Trent?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
And Dana's a yes, and that motion passes unanimously of the 6 members present. Okay, do we have a motion for the compiler?
I have a motion. I move that the Hamilton Wenham Regional School Committee appoint David Polito as the compiler of the summative evidence for the superintendent, and as a backup, Jennifer Carr.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Even though she's left the room, she said she would,
She
right?
said she would. All right, a
Doesn't
second by
matter, she left the
Trent.
room.
All right, are there questions, discussion? Okay, David,
Yes.
Amy,
Yes.
Trent,
Yes.
Julia,
Yes.
Dana's a yes, and that motion passes 5-0. Jen Carr has stepped out for a moment.
Thank you, David and Jen.
Thank you. I'm just making a note. Okay, do we feel like we need any other kind of a motion regarding who's going to write and the newly elected members, anything like that? Do we feel like I'm open to, you missed it, but we voted you in as the backup compiler.
Thanks, Jen. Can you ask that question again? Sorry.
So I just had a bunch of other notes, which I said, talking about newly elected members and about inviting any potential departed members to, sounds like they're no longer with us, but just no longer on the committee, to inviting them to participate, again, that's just been our historic practice.
Mhm.
I don't know if anyone feels like we need a motion on that.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Okay. Which is fine. I just want, I just didn't want to do things unilaterally. All right. Excellent. Thank you all for walking through that process with me. All right. Anybody else have anything on that?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Next up, we have an agenda item which is just around external communications. And we've had some conversations about this, and I know it's a very broad topic, I know, but Eric and I sort of did some work. We did discover sort of a useful policy that already exists that speaks to some of the concerns that have been raised. I don't really have a lot of thoughts on how to actually structure this conversation. I just know that people are looking for, it sounded like people are looking for sort of guidance around best practices about communicating. And I don't
So
know.
what's
I'm gonna
this link,
open it up.
Dana?
Huh?
What's this link taking me to?
It's a,
Policy
it's a
section.
policy. You're not getting there?
No, I am,
Policy
but
on
I'm
school
trying to help
committee
you
Oh.
start the conversation.
I was like,
the
it's a
website's
policy.
Good.
Yeah, so no. I mean, it's a school committee member authority, and it just addresses, it's the BBAA School Committee Member Authority, and it addresses some of the duties and responsibilities and sort of norms and guidelines that are norms and expectations, I guess, of school committee members. Genuinely, I put this on here, I don't have an agenda, I'm looking for what other people want to talk about this, or about something that isn't addressed by this.
Well, I think that I appreciate you putting it on here, because I think that we live now in a world where there's a town newspaper, there's social media, and that means there's lots of different ways for school committee members to speak publicly in indelible fashion. And I think that it's worth having a discussion of, a concern was brought up previously about a public communication. I know that we want to preserve people's, rights, in public communication, but also, I guess the thing that I find to be most useful about the discussion is how are we being very, very clear to the public when something is a individual's opinion and when it is not an individual's opinion, right? Because that's the first thing that I see here in this authority is really a discussion of the times that you can and you cannot speak on behalf of the committee. And I think that the ways in which we communicate externally right now, that can be muddied very easily, right? I could write something on a Facebook post and I could use we, or I could just, respond without including, any kind of pronoun whatsoever. And I'm then depending upon everybody that reads that to be able to interpret that as, is that my opinion? Is that the opinion of the school committee? And it does get confusing. And so I think that if we have, guidelines that we all agree to, as we know, I don't know to what extent they can be binding, but at least they would be something that everybody would be comfortable with, even if the messages that were said were not necessarily things that people agreed with.
Yeah, and I did want to add, which I didn't put on here because it isn't a policy, but I actually printed it out because I didn't realize it was going to be quite so long. But the MASC does have a handbook that does also speak to this. Again, it's not a legal document. It's a handbook. But it does speak to social media, and it does speak a little bit about, it's a useful document, which I'm happy to refer people to. I do think one of the things I found helpful in looking at policy and in looking at the handbook, people absolutely can make statements on social media about their own opinions, and it is important to try to make clear that you are speaking as an individual and not for the committee, or if you're speaking for the committee, to make sure that you're saying that you're speaking for the committee. One distinction that I found helpful when I was doing a little bit of research and thinking about this topic was thinking about whether the topic that you're speaking to is something that is going to be coming before the committee. Because, something that is going to be coming before the committee, and the handbook speaks to this, but it sort of gets spoken, is that your idea is that you're supposed to enter the meeting with the potential to listen to your colleagues and potentially change your mind or come in uncertain about how you might want to vote. And so that's an area where one wants to be really cautious about putting something out if it's a matter that's going to be coming before the committee.
Wouldn't that, if it was a matter that we knew was going to go before the committee, and we posted it about on social media, isn't that a violation of open meeting law? Like, I've been real careful about that.
Well, it's certainly it's certainly a violation of sort of what all of our sort of the policies and kind of the norms around that. The idea is that that's your job as a school committee member, is to take that up in the committee and use your position in the committee. Does that make sense? Other people can speak because
Yeah.
I am not.
I mean, the other thing I try and do in the very rare occasions that I have to email one of my kids' teachers about something is I always preface the email as, I am speaking as a parent to you, not as a member of the school committee. And that's literally like the first or second sentence in any email I send to a teacher. Just to make sure that it's like completely clear.
Yeah, and I would say that that's never a bad thing to do. And also, I would say, in other words, if you're writing an email that is just simply, I have a question about yesterday's homework assignment, it's very clear that that's really just about, I wouldn't say it's a requirement on there's nothing bad about doing what you're doing. But I also would say, there's plenty of times it's very clear that you're talking specifically about your specific child and that,
I think the open meeting law issue would be if, say, on social media, one of us posted or answered a question and a discussion started to
yes,
happen.
that's definitely a violation of open meeting
Yes.
law. Right.
But just to, agree with Trent, this does make things really muddy with social media. Like, and I am careful about posting on social media. I try to just, I rarely do, but if it's like, someone's like, oh, I wish that there was a presentation about XYZ, and I could say, oh, there's a presentation about XYZ next week, because that's just factual public info. But I try really hard not to express opinion about things that we're discussing in the meeting. But I guess, like, reading through some of these policies, which I've actually been reviewing for a different reason, there's really not clarity around exactly how to, if two of us chime in on a post, nobody else can, like, it's not that specific. So it is just something to be careful about.
In excuse me, the sort of time that I've been here, right? When stuff like this becomes an issue, it doesn't matter what the policies and procedures are.
People do it anyway.
They're gonna
Yeah.
do it, right? And that's the unfortunate thing. I just think with sort of time, wisdom, and sheer exhaustion, I have tried to. I find myself sort of less and less like speaking publicly, especially on social media, about anything, which is very tough because right now trying to whip up support for a school vote. So the other day I actually found myself responding to some stuff online, and like, oh no, here. but it was just a simple fact, you know, the new parking actually has a queue for 70 cars. Oh, how is that gonna, you know, and explaining those and then, you know, but it's so tough because at the same time too, no matter where I go in town, you know, people know who I am and that I'm on the school board. So when I'm having conversation with, you know, about anything, they're like, oh, what's going on there? And I'll say, well, you know,
Watch the meeting.
board, but, you know, and like, you know, like, what I would like to see is this, and hopefully the board, you know, will agree with me when we talk about it, you know, together, and, you know, but that, you know, but that's when I'm like face to face. I would never type anything.
Right, I think
Like,
that-
anything that isn't like a solid fact.
Well, and that is an important difference, because when you're talking to one person face-to-face, it doesn't invite, all the rest of the committee is
Right.
not there to chime in, you're not having a debate or discussion, you're talking individually with a citizen, and that is a different situation, and
Right.
that is something that's changed, that the landscape is different when you're out in the social media.
So I have a question that you kind of sparked when you were talking about, when you started your comment. What is, oh, I know, because you were like, what's to stop somebody really from saying what they want or doing what they want? And that's kind of the question I've been having when we discuss this topic. What is to stop any of us from doing what we're talking about? Like, I don't want to. I really believe in these policies and the ethics of not speaking for this committee, but there's not really a policy that says what happens if a member does.
Yeah, no, and that's true, and it really is a matter of, and that our protocols kind of say something along the lines of when people get off track, they'll get called out in this meeting, and that's really the only,
Right.
you know, there's not, right, we don't have school committee jail.
I don't want school committee jail, but it just feels a little bit like, what is the consequence, or what is the action that we
A
can
school
take?
committee member is the only current member of public office that can't be recalled
Right.
for
Why-
any reason.
why?
I've always thought that's a little,
Correct.
it's unfair. Like, if you can recall a selectman, you should be able to recall a school committee member.
Is there a reason behind
That's
that?
only new too, so. That's only in the past couple of years, so.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
no, I know.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know the answer, but I do know that that is true, because I have gotten to answer that question for members of the citizens, citizenry about recalls. So, yeah. So I think the accountability comes into this group.
I mean, unfortunately, it falls on the individual, right?
Right.
And it falls on all of us as an individual.
It falls on the individual, but it also falls on the committee.
Right, but the reality is, there is no committee jail. There's nothing, right? So
Don't
if
want
you
committee
go through the process, and I'm not saying I know firsthand, but if someone on the committee was to file an open meeting law violation on the committee, the AG would then get back to whoever the chair might be and say, you have to resolve this.
Right.
Where you then take the entire committee and say, we can't do that anymore, and that's the resolution.
Correct.
Which is the problem in the first place. Again, not saying I know that from firsthand
Right.
information.
No, yeah.
but-
No, thank you for that. Yeah, and I think ultimately, I mean, the ultimate judgment is at the ballot box with the voters.
long time.
But that's a long time, and that's not, I think,
Oh, yeah.
you know, I think it's,
Now, in the fact that we're having this conversation, right, as much as I joke, again, I've been here 9 years at this point, and I've had, you know, this come up every few years or so. And every time we go back, we look at the wording of the policy and everything, and we make it a little bit stronger. And the more you talk about it, the more solid a document we create, and the more solid a base, excuse me, you know, the committee gets, and the foundation to continue the work to move forward. So as long as we just sort of keep doing that, and keep reminding ourselves why we're really here, right, what we're here to do, and you know, at the end of the day, we go home to our
Well,
families, thing, that, you know, we're okay. we're okay. But like, these conversations are always great to have. Excuse me, as much as it very frustrating at the same time.
Well, and I think it needs to be made public. Like, I don't think any of us were aware of how stressful the problem was until we were informed what was going on.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I'm saying is that when we were Amy was sort of saying about what are the consequences, and the consequences are, it's a fine line. Like, people are people, and I love Trent having sort of pushed to have this conversation, because maybe the answer is that it would be good if there were an opportunity for people to bring forward questions before they take action in this meeting, like, or ask ahead of time. I'd like to do something, and I'm not sure, and that has happened. I have had people email me and ask, can I do something? And I've, consulted with the MASC or whatever to find out, like, yes, you can do that, no, you can't. But I think that it would be great if people were more proactive about, like, I'd like to do something, and to David's point, sometimes that's not easy because you're just looking at a post and you're like, I could answer this, but again, we all make mistakes. I mean, so I don't know that it needs to be called out every single time someone makes a mistake. Things happen. I mean, I've told many times before, I was in the grocery store and I got a phone call from Michelle Bailey, who was like, you cannot do that. And it was a genuine mistake. I genuinely, had thought that I was within.
Sure, I mean, it makes sense. This
Right.
isn't our full-time job.
Correct.
We're new at this every 3 years. I think it's fair to have a little leeway, but
I'm just thinking I haven't gotten a call from Michelle in a
I'm calling you now.
Just, I think you brought this back to operationally. Is there any operational, recommendation that we would like to make to committee members? Like, Jen was talking about, if I'm going to send an email to an individual teacher, this is what I do. I'm less concerned about one-to-one communications with there being a misapprehension of I'm speaking for the committee or I'm not. I'm more concerned about, a editorial that is, in a, something for 5 years, the person that reads it 5 years from now, if it doesn't say it explicitly, right? And so I know that, is that something that we would say, like, we want that moved to the front of a discussion, like, and there's no enforcement. It's just like, that's, if you're going to have, a editorial or a social media post or something that could be perceived as, speaking not as an individual. In a social media post, it's harder to put that big, long, disclaimer, but in my opinion is, an easy way of doing that. I don't
Or
actually
just,
post on social media, so I'm going to look like a Luddite when I'm talking about it.
Right.
Yeah.
You and me both. So,
Smart, you're just proving that you're the smartest one.
Yeah.
That's all you do.
yeah, no, I think, I certainly, I don't know that we want, I like the idea of sort of establishing, like, the best practices and norms, is that it's always good to say, to clarify, I'm speaking just for myself, or in my own opinion, or something like that. And remembering that you're allowed to have opinions, and you're allowed to, and even, like, that disclaimer does allow you to do that. And that's important to note. As a separate thing, there are separate sort of norms around not doing that for something that's going to be coming before the committee. So, like, it's a very different thing, something that's already been voted on by the committee and is now moving on, saying your opinion on that, it's already, the committee has already made a statement on it. If the committee hasn't made a statement on something yet, I would really caution people against putting a lot of opinions out there, because the idea is supposed to be coming to the committee with an open mind or potential open mind. Does that make sense?
No, I appreciate the discussion.
Yeah.
And
Julia, I don't know if you have anything to, I just making sure you
I don't know. I appreciate the discussion. I think that all we can do is what we've been doing, because there is no, like you said, there's no real consequence, other than accountability and having these kind of open conversations. So I think it's just important to continue the discussion and to share resources like this as much as we can. So I pretty much agree with everything that was said.
Yeah, and I'm happy to, I mean, I know you could all find it, but I'm happy to send the link to the MASC handbook, which does have sort of an ethics, it's not a chapter, it's like a few pages, couple pages on, that was, I thought helpful, not that it was brand new, but just helpful in sort of spelling it out. Okay, are we ready to move on? Okay. Vinny? You're going to do the prior year invoices first,
Yeah,
right?
he's gonna do this
okay.
first, yep.
Okay, the first thing on my agenda for tonight is approval on prior year invoices. Now, what happens here is, as you know, on June 30th, our fiscal year ends. On about the middle of July, we officially close our books. If an individual ordered or contracted with an individual and did not submit an invoice or did not submit a purchase order by the time I close the books in July, they don't have any funds encumbered. Therefore, any invoices have to be brought in front of the school committee for approval, because Mass General Law states that we can't pay prior year invoices with current year funds. This happens, we bring this forward to the school committee probably 2 times a year. Any invoices we receive after or around July 15th, we usually hold on to them till about the October-November timeframe and then bring all of them forward for vote. And then anything we receive after that, we usually hold till about February or March and bring it forward again. Instead of bringing them one by one, because it would almost be every other meeting, you'd be voting on one invoice. Today, we just have 4 invoices. The bulk of them are invoices that were left behind by an individual who doesn't work here anymore, so their employment ended for whatever reason on June 30th, and we subsequently received invoices after that. And then the 4th invoice, the vendor did not send it to us until about October. So tonight, we're just seeking approval for these 4 invoices so we can get the vendors paid.
Okay, thank you. David, you want to start us off with a motion?
I moved the Hamilton Wenham Regional School Committee approve the payment of the invoices that appear on tonight's agenda under new business, letter F.
Second.
Second by Amy Kumberger. Anybody have questions? Is there any discussion? All right, looks like we're ready for a vote. Julia?
Yes.
Trent?
yes.
David?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
And Dana's a yes, and that motion is approved unanimously of the 5 members who are present.
Thank you. So my next item for tonight is to review the FY25 year-end financial forecast as of quarter two ending December 31st, 2024. Before I dive into it, there's just one thing I want to mention, or maybe one thing I hope you take away after all this is, although we're considered a small school district, we do have a $45 million budget, and there are a lot of things going on. Every year, by the time we approve the budget on February 8th, 2024, and by the time we end on June 30th, 2025, in that 17th month period, a lot of things can happen that change from our budget to our actual, and on top of that, there are a lot of moving parts to the budget. You have all your expenses, your revenues, and your offsets. Changes in any one of them are going to be reflected in your changes to your forecast. So if there's one thing you take away is that there is a lot going on and a lot of things can change before the year is over. So ultimately, we are happy to inform you that at this time we're projecting we will end fiscal year 25 in a positive balance of approximately $430,000. As you see after I go through the presentation, this really is an extraordinary feat considering what is going on this year. This is that chart based on our department or location, our 5 schools and our 7 district-wide departments. Spread out again is that $430,000 balance. This is that same chart based on the 12 DESI categories. The Department of Elementary and Secondary Education states that a regional school district has to monitor and approve their annual operating budget based on these 12 DESI categories. You'll notice off to the right is my projected column. There are currently 7 DESI categories that I am projecting might end in a deficit at year end. Tonight, we are only asking for transfers for 4 of them. If you notice the 3 in the middle, they're really small balances, and I think that by the time the year ends, we might be able to close that gap and not need the transfer. And the reason for that is, once we start issuing transfers and we start moving the money around, it definitely gets a little more complicated and a little more confusing. So I always try to at least leave as much of the budget as the original to help explain everything. When we come to Q3, if those 3 DESI categories are still projected to be in a deficit, I'll ask for a transfer at that time. But tonight, as you'll see later in the presentation, I'm only hitting on the other 4. So like I do with all of my presentations, I really try to make as much detail in it as possible. There are 19 slides towards the end of this presentation that break out all 12 of our schools or departments based on all 12 of the DESI categories. So even if we had one teacher that was at one school in one DESI category that worked 1 additional hour that we didn't budget for, that additional funds are listed out in the detail at the end. So I literally detailed out every single change in value, no matter how small or no matter how large. Like most of my presentations, I'm not going to go through all of that detail. I've made a couple summary slides that I'm going to go over, and then I'm going to advance to a few of the detail slides that I'd like to go over with you, because I think they're big ticket items that you should at least know a little bit more about. So obviously the first thing on here, in terms of the summary, we're going to go over our deficits first. The big thing is our negotiations. Now everyone has heard me talk about it ad nauseum as it relates to the 26 budget. For those in the audience or at home who haven't listened, when we approved our budget on February 8th, 2024, only one of our 5 union contracts were settled. Therefore, we had to put an estimate on what we thought our COLA was going to be, our cost of living adjustment. When those 5 contracts were finally settled, the result left us in a deficit of about $1 million in our salary accounts. So again, we put in an estimate of what we thought everyone's salaries were going to grow year over year, and those actuals came in, which resulted in a deficit of about $1 million spread out across the school. In addition, another deficit we're facing is in our out-of-district costs. One thing I will point out is the balance you see here is not the ending balance that I'm going to discuss in a moment. but it is a large deficit that we do have to deal with. There's two sides of it. There's the tuitions, where we have projected a $435,000 deficit before offsets, and then our transportation deficit for out of district is coming in at roughly $264,000. The last thing in terms of our deficits is our building and our building equipment. As many of you know, most of our schools are about 70 years old, and this year, more than any year since I've been here, our equipment is really failing at a much higher rate. Curtis has been ripping out the hair that he doesn't have on his head over the past few months related to all the equipment that's failing. The biggest thing, as we've discussed with you, is the high school and middle school boilers. At this time, we are estimating that we might end with a $485,000 deficit that I will go into a little bit more detail in a moment. I do have a minor update to the slide as it relates to Bucher's flat portion of the roof that I'm going to get into more detail in the detailed slides. And then last, our high school and middle school AC air handler unit in the library failed at the end of last summer, and we're estimating that that is going to cost an additional $140,000 to replace that this year. On the flip side, we do have some surpluses that are helping us out in handling our deficits. One big thing is some of the great financial decisions that Eric had made over the past few years as it relates to our out-of-district tuitions. Ever since COVID back in FY20, the district has prepaid tuitions every single year. They've ranged anywhere from $1 million to $1.4 million. For those of you who are here, in FY20, when the schools closed, we were left with the residual balance at the end of the year. We had thought when FY21 was going to start that we were going to have a huge surplus of new expenditures, whether it was PPE or whether it was some sort of equipment to help with the hybrid, new technology. So the decision was made at the time to use FY20 funds to prepay FY21 tuitions, which ultimately frees up that money in FY21 to spend on something else. Well, when FY21 ended, the exact opposite happened that we thought was going to happen. We spent less money than we anticipated. Therefore, every single year, we've rolled forward those prepaid tuitions, saving them for a rainy day. And for FY25, it's a monsoon, as you'll see in a moment. One other thing is around our health insurance. This is an area you may have heard me talk about a lot. This is really where I set aside kind of additional funds to help us out during the year in case we have any unforeseen items. So with health insurance, there is a lot of moving parts. Just to go through some of them, you have our participation rate. So when we set our budget, we take our very last invoice, which is either January or February, depending on which one we pull, and we budget for exactly how many people are enrolled in health insurance on that day and what plan they're in. But when the next year rolls over, we could have a drop in participation. So not only are we budgeting for every single member that is enrolled as of that day, if we have any vacant positions in the budget, we also budget full health insurance benefits for all those positions. When we approved the FY25 budget, there was 12 vacant positions. Out of those 12 vacant positions, only 5 of them actually enrolled in health insurance, which ultimately represented a $240,000 surplus from those individuals not taking health insurance. It's about a $22,000 for each individual's benefits in their health insurance for a family plan, and we budget the full family plan cost for each of those vacant positions, making sure we cover our liability, because it could ultimately happen. Every one of those people could enroll in our health insurance. It is unlikely, but it could happen. And this is, again, where we see some of that residual balance at the end of the year, because it's unlikely going to happen. So I try to build in some of those additional funds within the health insurance. We also have This year, unlike other years, we have what I'm calling a negotiation placeholder. So as I mentioned, we didn't have all of our union contracts settled when we approved the budget. The COLA that I placed into the budget, after seeing what was going on in other communities, I felt might have been a little light. So I tried to incorporate a few additional funds. The $184,000 is equal to a 1% COLA for the entire district. So I incorporated a more funds within our health insurance account to cover any additional COLA that may have occurred. In addition to all of these, you have your health insurance premium rate. So everyone knows that your health insurance increases year over year. For our FY25 budget, working with NFP, our insurance brokers, and Harvard Pilgrim, when we set the budget, I set it at an increase of 9.99%. They had told me to do 10%, but it really just didn't feel right to me to be double digits, so I made it 9.99 to make myself feel a little bit better. When we actually went to negotiate, we were able to negotiate a 4.9% increase. So that is a reduction of 5.09%, which on a roughly $3.5 million line item represented a $164,000 savings because of that reduced health insurance premium rate that we were able to negotiate. In addition to these three things, when we go to set the budget, like I said, we incorporate the benefits for every individual who is actually enrolled, but we also build in an additional 1 to 2% for enrollment growth, because anyone at any time could walk into the door and say, my spouse lost their health insurance, they lost their job, I need to enroll in the district's health insurance. So we always try to build in a little bit more for any of those instances, and again, it's usually around 1 or 2%. So that additional participation growth was worth about $82,000, and as I mentioned before, our participation actually dropped. So not only do you have that drop in participation, but now you have that additional growth rate that also is going to be left at year end. The last item, just for our surpluses, is around our salary savings from vacancies. This is an item we see every year. It really varies from year to year and is very unpredictable. For FY25, if our vacancies continue for the remainder of the year, we will be looking at a balance across the district of about $350,000. Now, this could change. We could have one of those positions filled tomorrow, and this number would be reduced by the time the year ends. One of the biggest positions we currently have as a vacancy is our school psychologist, where we budgeted about $101,000 for that position, and it has been vacant for the entire year, and we anticipate it will stay vacant till year end. Okay, so like I had mentioned, I usually try to detail out all of the additions and subtractions and our variances throughout the year. I've included here our summary chart. I've tried to categorize all the major expenses and put them all into buckets. This is included as an exhibit in your school committee packet if you want to see it a little bit bigger. One thing I would like to point out that I noticed this week, I did make a little bit of an error. It does not change the bottom line, but historically, when we set our budget, we know what everyone's salaries are going to be for the next year. So when we put in their budget and the next year actually comes, when we run our analysis, most people come up as zero because we budgeted exactly what their salaries are going to be. If a variance does pop up, there's really only 3 reasons it would happen. You have your salary scale advancement, so somebody submitted to move along the columns in the salary schedule, but didn't meet the requirements, and therefore did not move and did not receive that higher salary. So you would see savings there. The second reason is turnover. So that individual was here, we budgeted for them, but for whatever reason, they're not with us this school year, and we have a balance left over from their salary. The third reason is really just an error. I put in the wrong amount for their salary, and now there's some sort of variance there. The error that I made was around the salary scale advancement. So for this year, there was a 4th thing that threw it off, and that was the COLA. So everybody was coming up as a variance because we did not budget enough for their salaries. It skipped my mind that out of that number, I should have backed out the salary scale advancements for the people that did not fulfill the requirements. So I incorrectly accounted here at the bottom for the additional FY25 COLA of roughly $1 million. It should be about $80,000 higher, and there should be one other line item on the left-hand side for salary scale advancement savings. It does not change the bottom line. There would still be $428,000 at the end. It's just where I categorized it. I just wanted to point that out in case somebody is looking for that number within this chart. So if there's no questions there, I'm going to advance to the few detailed slides I want to go over that I wrote the numbers down for somewhere. I can just click. So the first one is maintenance. As I had mentioned, a lot of our equipment is failing this year. So there are two big ticket items that we're looking for transfers for tonight. Again, that is the high school and middle school library AC unit. I believe during last summer, a lot of it was leaking. We tried to repair it. It did not last very long, and it started leaking again, I believe, a few weeks later. So at this time, we are going to put out to bid the replacement of that AC unit on top of the library. We're estimating that that will cost about $140,000. One thing I wanted to mention, DESE has rules on where these things get categorized. So if we make an upgrade to one of our pieces of equipment and it is less than $150,000, it gets classified as extraordinary maintenance and falls to our maintenance DAC. If it is more than $150,000, it gets categorized as a capital item and goes on our capital and fixed assets DAC. So because this item is under $150,000, it's why it's in this spot right here. The second item, which we are not completely committed to yet, is fixing the Cutler parking lot. Obviously, all of the upgrades we're making at this time, we're really not focusing on Cutler and Winthrop. However, it is a little bit of a safety issue. We really want to see what happens with the vote before we determine exactly what we're going to do here. But I am setting aside about $50,000 to fix some of those gaping holes that are there. We did have a few students and a few employees trip in those areas. So at the very least, we're at least going to fill the holes. But again, it really depends on what happens with that vote on what direction we take. The next item here is around our capital acquisitions and improvement and replacement of our fixed assets. So right now, this number needs to be updated, as I mentioned before. So Eric, myself, and Curtis met last week, and one of the discussions we had was around our year-end balances. So we were looking at it, and we were determining that we were probably going to be somewhere around our 430 to about 600,000 at year-end. So we came together and really tried to find what kind of project, or project being one, because there is a lot of projects already going on, that we can tackle between now and year-end. As I said, we're really trying to stay away from Cutler and Winthrop, and as you can see, we are putting a lot of money at the high school, middle school already, so obviously we went and turned to Bucher. When you look at Bucher, you look at the heart of the building. What do we really need for the place to function? You need your heat, your roof, your buildings, and your ventilation. Well, our boilers were replaced here about 6 years ago, so those don't need any replacing. So then we looked at the roof. There's two different sections of the roof here. You have your original building where the roof was replaced about, I think, 18 years ago maybe. And then you have your addition, which is out back, which was replaced, I think, 21 years ago. And there's the flat portion in the back that needs some work done. So one of the items we thought was to start working on replacement of the roof in the back of Bucher. We estimated about $200,000 to replace that. However, since we met and discussed the Bucher roof, we received an update from our engineers on the high school, middle school boiler replacement, and the new estimate they gave us was $210,000 more than what I built into this budget. We are going to be putting that out to bid within the next 3 weeks. If that value comes back the way they think it is, we might not work on the Bucher roof this year. We might have to divert all those funds to the high school boiler because that is much more of a priority for us right now. If anyone's driven behind the high school, middle school, we have rented a 18-wheeler trailer that has a boiler rental inside of it that is currently heating our building. It is very expensive. It burns oil and not gas, which is twice the price. So really, the high school and middle school boiler are a lot bigger priority than the current small section of the Bucher roof. But again, if those bids come back lower, we'll probably focus on the Bucher roof, or if between now and Q3, if additional funds free up, maybe we still look at doing the Bucher roof. But currently, right now, that is being put on hold, and all those funds are being diverted to the high school boiler replacement. We are currently estimating that the boiler will cost somewhere, in the forecast right now, we were budgeting at about $450. We are moving that up to about $650 to replace and remove the boilers that are currently there. Okay. One last thing I'm going to go over is the special ed out-of-district tuitions.
Sorry,
So-
question
Yeah, of course.
before you move
Oh,
on.
Please, let me take a sip.
Yeah.
Curtis is here for this, too.
You can just like do a hand signal and I'll interrupt you. Yeah. That's a lot.
Yep.
Is there any way in which the decision for next fiscal year to use E&D to cover operational expenses is stealing resources from this?
Yes, if we didn't have the funds this year to cover it. So if we didn't have the money this year, we probably would not have made that recommendation to do that for the 26 budget. Does that make sense?
So, yeah,
yeah.
I'm going to ask questions slightly differently.
Yep.
If we didn't make that decision, does it change the way that you approach these problems moving forward?
If we did not do that, no, because I would still choose to use this year's funds to replace the high school, middle school boiler. We have to start that process right now. If we wait till July 1 to start that, we will not have heat come November.
I hear you. Yeah, and we don't need the heat in June, right? We need it. Now, are there any of these capital projects that are going to bleed over into the next fiscal year? And will those projects be impacted by that decision?
Some of them may bleed into next fiscal year, and the decision to do that means there's almost no funding for those projects. Unless we free up funding within our 26 budget, or unless we get approval to use some of our capital stabilization fund. So we do still have, we could still act on some of these things if they were an emergency. But yes, making that decision does pull away resources from our capital projects.
And anything that we don't know that's going to break from July 1 on. So then what is going to, I'll stop and let others comment. Yeah.
You got the floor.
Okay. I guess if that does happen, if we do have these projects that bleed over and or something else breaks, let's just assume that's a probability, right? Are we not going to potentially, let's say we have a $250,000 unanticipated cost that
Next year.
occurs next year.
Yep.
Are we going to not have the ability to respond to it because of the decision to use E&D to cover operational expenses?
I will say our ability to respond to it is a lot lower. It is not completely out. There are other resources we could draw upon, but with that decision, lowers our ability to react to any of it greatly. That answer doesn't answer.
Yeah,
it.
no, it does. And then the light dimmed, which was how
We're saving money. We're trying to.
my personality like had the same effect at the moment. Okay.
That decision is, without a doubt, pulls away from our ability to respond to any equipment going down next year.
Okay. So then if we do run out of money next year
Next year.
to fix these things, do we have to go to a special town vote?
I would ask what the committee wants to do. My recommendation would probably be to tap into E&D to pay for those things which would require a town vote. Yep. So we do have residual balance in our E&D that we could use for something like this, but the towns would have to approve it. The voters would have to approve that. In addition, we still have approximately $500,000 in our capital stabilization fund that we transferred this year that we could tap without voter approval. It would just be-
$500,000, that's like one air conditioning unit. Or like a dozen eggs, yeah.
It's a dozen eggs, yeah.
I will say, I find your panic, I hold off till the Q3 report, because I think it's a much, we see where like, oh, wow, we have no money, or, there's a little bit more. But your concerns are definitely very valid, especially the way things seem to be breaking around here.
And to be honest, my Q2 is still conservative. When we get to Q3, I really unleash the funds that I don't think we're going to spend. Just as an example, between Eric and I, we probably have about 70,000 in just, I had a word for it. Contingency funds, sorry, that aren't included in that 470,000. So I have not incorporated that we are not going to spend those yet. So Q3 is when I really kind of unleash what I don't think we're going to spend. I still have some reserved here, so.
And there are assumptions made that every budget holder spends everything.
And that never happens.
And that never happens, so we know we'll get some bounce back.
But I do want to actually say the level of panic you have right now really is your true welcome to the school. You're trying to keep everything afloat.
Yep.
And realize there's just so many balls in the air.
Which is why I started with there's a lot of moving parts. Yeah. Should I move on to my tuitions?
Please.
So I'm just going to start in a different order that's presented here just to help kind of explain it. Obviously, right here, it's just in order of the dollar value. But when we create our 25 budget and we look at what we anticipated we were going to spend for out-of-district tuitions, we're coming in at about $435,000 over budget. So that means either we have additional students that were outplaced, which I believe is not accurate. I believe there's only one difference. What it really is the students that we did budget for are going to either more expensive schools or the schools that they are going to have raised their price more than we raised our budget for it. So because of that, we're looking at a $435,000 projected deficit for the tuitions. That's what you saw on the second slide I went over. However, we are receiving an additional $120,000 in a circuit breaker offset, so that's the state reimbursing us for our out-of-district tuitions that we spend. It's a mandate that they put on us, and they fund some of it. They don't fund all of it. We've gotten word that we're going to receive about another $120,000. That would bring our $435,000 deficit to somewhere around $315,000 deficit. In addition to that, as I had mentioned, we had prepaid $1.3 million in tuitions at the end of last year. If we did not do this, I would be saying a much different story right now. We would be talking about hiring freezes, expenditure freezes, and a complete budget freeze. which means we would be telling teachers and principals, you're not buying anything else for the rest of the year. Whatever is in your building right now is what you're using. There's no more orders for your pens, your paper, whatever you're ordering is completely on hold until July 1st. Whatever vacant positions we have right now, we're taking them off school spring and we're not hiring them. If a vacant position occurs next week, for whatever reason, someone comes in and says they're resigning, we are not replacing that person because we need to bridge that gap and cover our deficit. So if we did not prepay tuitions, we would be in a much dire situation right now. I understand that not everyone loves the prepayment of tuitions. It definitely makes things confusing. But again, if we didn't do this, we would pretty much be in a $700,000 deficit right now. And we were trying to be coming up with ways on how to cut our costs between now and June. However, yep.
Do you need a drink? Okay, so this is for this year.
We used last year's money to pay for this year's tuitions.
Did we do the same thing for next year?
On here, I'm stating that we might do it, but only for $100,000 next year, and it's for the same reason we have been doing it, to just give us some sort of cushion for next year. However, if something happens between now and June, the boilers at Bucher go down and it's another $600,000, well, we won't prepay any tuitions and we'll use all that money to do it. But if we end the year right now, as I think we're gonna, at roughly 430, I will be asking you guys if we can prepay a little bit for 26.
But it's less than 10% of what we prepaid for 25.
That is correct.
And
If you would like me to do more, I would be more than happy. I just didn't, this was me introducing that I wanted to do it again. If we have a larger, the decision really needs to be made because remember, whatever we end with this year is gonna go into our 27 budget. And remember in 26, we used $2 million to supplement the budget. So the discussion really needs to happen at Capitol, how we wanna end 25. Are we gonna end it as large as we can to help the 27 budget? Are we gonna use some of it to fix something else? Are we gonna use some of it to prepay to help if anything happens in 26? So that will be discussed in Capitol before year end. But this was me introducing that I still would like to prepay tuitions.
if we assumed that next year was going to be similar to this year, and that meant that if we didn't prepay $1.3 million of tuition, we would be in that bleak future that you just
Not
described.
exactly, because next year you don't have that $1 million in additional COLA. That
Okay.
was a 25 item only because we didn't have settled contracts. We have settled contracts for 26, and we incorporated that additional million into the budget. So it in terms of salaries, it won't be as bad in 26 as it was in 25. In terms of building stuff, I'm not sure.
Okay, so that almost reassured me, and then it went back.
That's what I do. Make you feel good and then pull it back.
My everyday.
I have a question.
Yes.
It sounds like there was some surprise about the rise in cost of tuition for this line item. Is there any way to anticipate or know whether that will happen again?
OSD has already set their rates for next year. I believe it's like 3.6.
0.68.
The problem here was we had students switch schools.
Okay. So like, how would you know that? Yeah.
Yeah, there's really no way to anticipate that, especially 9 months before the school year starts.
Right. Okay.
It's just something that kind of happens. The state does have mechanisms to help out with that. If your tuitions, I believe if they rise, I think it's 15% year over year, there's something called extraordinary relief, where they give you more circuit breaker money to help offset that. We are under that threshold at the moment, though, so. think that was it on that slide. Yeah. So just to go over it, tonight we are asking for the transfer of our 4 DESI categories. That's our teachers, our pupil services, our operations and maintenance, and our capital and fixed assets. Again, our teachers, it's related to our additional COLA. Our pupil services really relates to our deficit in our out-of-district transportation. And then obviously our operations, maintenance, and our capital revolves around the additional need to replace the high school boiler and the AC unit up at the high school. So tonight we're asking for those 4 transfers so we can get going on some of those projects and fund the salaries that are unfunded at the moment. I can take any questions. And I forgot to mention, I practiced this before. I'd like to at least extend an offer. I know a lot's going on and I know it's confusing. If anyone wants to meet and talk about it one-on-one and go into the numbers a little more, or just understand better how the budget process works, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's what I'm here for. I understand it's confusing. I applaud you for understanding how it is through my 6 budget presentations a year. So if you really have further questions or you go home and you think of a question, really don't hesitate to ask. So
Thank you. And I've asked many a question, so he's telling the truth. He'll go through it. Do you want to start us off with the motion?
Sure. Excuse me. I move that the Hamilton Wenham Regional School Committee approves the FY25 operating expense budget transfers as recommended here in by the Assistant Superintendent of Finance Administration and as presented on the previous slide entitled FY25 Q2 Transfer Request.
Second.
Second by Amy Kumberger. Hold on one second.
Right.
Okay. Does anybody have questions? Discussion? Okay. So I think Julia has departed the meeting.
I know the question was.
So, all right, so now we are all in the room, so looks like we're ready for a vote, and we no longer need to do a roll call. Everybody's clear on the motion?
Mhm.
All right, all those in favor? That is unanimous of the 4 members present, and the motion passes.
thank you, guys.
Oh, a new
Thank you,
graphic.
Vin.
Thank you. Oh, very nice. I like the juggling. That's
Juggling
very
numbers.
nice.
That's Vinnie's every.
Excellent. All right, let's run down some committee reports. Capital Finance?
I should have,
This is the last one, did we?
let me see.
Jim was on.
Okay, yes, we did meet. I wrote down 3:04 PM, but not the date, so.
Excellent. All right.
We met on a date at
From
3:04
3 to
PM.
4.
And Vinnie went through a presentation on the budget projection to the end of the year, and regaled us again with the importance of the tuition prepayments that we just heard about, and then we scheduled our next meeting for March 17th.
Thank you. Policy.
Policy. So I finally got a good number of dates to meet. I'm just waiting on Janelle to get back to me about a couple of evening dates. So
Okay.
We're still,
Right,
sorry.
and
we're
now it sounds like you guys have 2 tasks.
We have tasks now. I
Yeah.
wrote them down,
Excellent.
so I can put together an agenda. Yep.
Great. Negotiations?
nothing
Nothing to
No
report?
negotiations.
And then we have a secretary report.
So, yeah, I emailed out earlier a very in-depth and extensive deep dive that Janelle did using, but I will say that I came up with the idea for the spreadsheet. Just for some points of pity. But yeah, she went back, I think found every missing thing since the beginning of time here. Because there are a few from, 2017
Yeah.
that I don't even know how to begin trying to search for that stuff. I'll check my notes, seeing as I was here,
You're the bridge.
and I mean, I could guess, but we have to figure out what's gonna happen if those can't be found. But I did see that Dana went through and actually threw a lot of notes on here.
Yeah, so there's four, those are accurate those four that say duplicate dates, that they're accurate, that they are missing, but they are also listed above, so they're listed twice.
Yeah, I
yeah.
just sort of forwarded this out.
yeah.
Just to get it to everybody, but I definitely have to go and do a deeper dive myself through it all.
Yeah, so I'm hoping, and it's very funny because to Trent's point, I did think to myself, I'm going to write on this document, it's a shared document, is this going to be okay? I really thought about it. I really was like, we are not deliberating, I'm telling you I have a draft.
Right, that's
so-
exactly what it's there for.
And then I just wanted to say on one of the things that I filled in, one says, Amy wrote the draft, Dana has it. I have it. You wrote it, and for some reason I have
You
it.
have
So
it?
I'm
Okay.
willing to turn it in, like,
Okay.
it's a draft that you wrote. I don't know why it's in but it is, and I have it.
Yeah, so we'll go through this and then figure out, throw them all on a consent
Well,
agenda.
so what I was saying, I briefly spoke to Janelle this morning because I was saying to her, like, as an example, if you're looking at the document that David shared, I have a draft of capital finance minutes from 2022. I have it in my file. And so I thought to myself, well, can I just send it to Janelle? And she said to me, yes, if you send me a draft and say, put this on the next agenda, she'll do that. So like, if I sent her the capital finance minutes from that date in 2022, she'll put it on your next capital finance
Oh, I see. Okay.
agenda for you to review.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that that's what, but I mean, it seems like,
I mean, some of
if
the
you've got
stuff-
another
if some of the
system-
older stuff too, I would have to imagine we could just put on, as long as it's not, anything we did,
Executive session.
an executive session.
Right.
That we could just put it on a consent agenda to approve as a general committee.
no, I think that that's probably true, because most of the other drafts that I have are all negotiations, which all do have executive
Yeah.
sessions, which is why I was not thinking that
Yeah,
way.
So then you and I can just throw together a
For a negotiation session,
5-minute
right.
meeting and approve them.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think, absolutely, so would then the procedure be then, if people have these, they should send them all to you? Or should they send them to Janelle to say, let's compile
Well, all I would do is forward them to Janelle,
okay,
so I don't know if it's easier for her. I'll ask her.
okay. And just
Uh,
let us
if
know
it's easier for
procedurally what you want us to do, because I asked her about that, specifically about that capital finance one, and she said, well, yeah, they'll just put it on, and then whenever they have the next meeting, it'll be on there. And, it'll be fascinating reading about what happened in May of 2022,
This is when you really start to figure out who really runs the show.
So, okay. But the hope is that people will go through and,
Oh, yeah, I mean, I have,
and I could just ask that where I wrote down Dana has notes. Notes is a broad term. So let's just say if you have notes, you might want to say, you
Sure.
might want to actually chime in. It's not like, if
has
it's
draft and has notes are two very
right.
different
A
things.
draft is like, I've got it, I got this. So, okay.
I'm just looking. I just added another executive session that I know I have, so I'll go through these. Thank you for putting this together. This is really
Yeah.
helpful.
Again, I can only
I was
take
talking to
part for the
Janelle.
colors. I was gonna say, yeah, this was all her.
All right, so,
Which he
we are meeting next week. If possible, I would like to put this under the secretary report next week. Just everybody look at this so that we can just say who's filled it in, what's missing. When I was on with Janelle, I also did sort of talk about sort of format for the minutes. They can definitely be brief and to the point. But I will ask that we put them in, they should be in full sentences and with some level of punctuation. They should need to be,
Edited.
they should need to be
Refresh.
ready for public viewing, because it is
No
the official.
Snapchat
Right, exactly.
Notes,
emojis.
Goes back to those notes I was talking about are going to need some updating. So, okay. Anybody have anything else on that?
No.
Okay.
Thank you again, Janelle
Yes. And David.
and David.
All right, to you, Eric.
She made me look good here.
All righty.
For sure.
We have some good news that we received yesterday in our MSBA. We attended the MSBA board meeting, at which they have voted to approve the Cutler Elementary School project in Hamilton-Wenham Regional School District to consolidate the student population of the existing Cutler Elementary School and Winthrop Elementary School and construct a new facility serving grades 1 through 5 on the site of the existing Cutler Elementary School. They approved the maximum total facilities grants of $48.9 million and the possibility of increasing it to a higher number of $49.7 million based on owners' contingencies throughout the project. We have 120 days after this notification to send in all certifications of local approvals for appropriation and necessary local votes, showing acceptance of the cost, the site, the type, the scope, the timeline, and the custom for the entire project. We get those votes from the town clerks when the town meeting's over and when the ballot is finalized. So we'll cross our fingers for those 2 days and take that information and send it back to the MSBA. If the community votes to support this project at both town meetings and both ballot boxes, the state would then execute a contract with us, which basically is a contract that supports this document and the approval by the board, that they're very willing to be involved in paying the grant amount within our project. So that's good news for us. We wanted to try and get that done before we got into town meeting, so we knew our final numbers. So we had that meeting yesterday. Dana and I attended along with members of the project team, Vinny as well, and Curtis was on that call as well. So it's exciting. We had a number of we had a state rep on there, Ms. Gasner, who spoke about the project as well. So good support all around, and we're looking forward to continuing the process. In the same vein, last night I did the 5th and final public forum for the project, in which we did a day in the life of a first grader. We had a new video set created to help us to help people to visualize that and what it would really look like. We also went over the tax implications for both of the towns, using the information that we have received from both Hamilton and Wenham FinComs. And I gotta say, both groups did a fantastic job of breaking down the data, simplifying the data, and really going deep into the numbers. If you want a lesson in regression theory, the Wenham FinCom took 2 full meetings and went through a fabulous breakdown of the numbers and whether or not they were willing to support it. And both FinComs are supporting this project as presented as the best option, given all of the things that are happening around the community, along with our budget, their budgets, their capital expectations, our capital expectations. So some good news there. And then as part of the forums ended, we did 5 forums, but we're also doing some open house tours starting Saturday, 10 to noon at the Cutler School. We're gonna open the doors and let people in and show them what that building's all about. And we're also gonna repeat that on the 15th, same time, 10 to 12. It'll be myself, some members of the district, and members of both the OPM and architectural team we'll be there to answer questions, and we still have a couple more Zooms that we're going to do with some elementary parent groups as well between now and town meeting. The other exciting news was it's so fascinating that we're doing this already, but we had our kindergarten parent night for next year's kindergarten class, which is exciting. It's great information, and we appreciate our administrators and our kindergarten teachers and our special ed staff who attended that meeting and really laid out the information. Jen Caulfield comes out and lays out the process of registration, how to get to the forms, and really helps get that going. We have more than we had last year at this time. We already have over 50 kids signed up, which is more than last year at this time. So we're looking to hopefully hold right around the same number, probably 7 classes of kindergarten students next year, to continue the trend. And then finally, it was mentioned earlier, but I gotta say it again, good luck to the 93 students who took off for Boston today from the high school to the DECA State this weekend. So today, tomorrow, and then the award ceremony will be Saturday, so we'll know Saturday. And also good luck to our boys and girls basketball teams who are entering tournament play Friday night at the high school. Both games will be there back to back. Boys first, and girls will begin right after the boys game is over. And that's all I have.
It's so funny.
Thank you.
My wife just texted me, ask Eric about any updates about DECA.
None yet. They just got there.
All right, thank you for that. Anybody have any other
I have a
questions?
question. Eric, do you have an update on when we're going to have a publicly available calculator for people's tax implications?
Not yet. Have you heard from them?
They said hopefully either the end of next week or the one after.
Okay, so this is a problem. We are 5 weeks away, right? We're 5 weeks away. And there's no way we're going to be able to get this calculator in front of everybody that needs it,
I mean,
right? Like, how are people going to make an intelligent decision based upon what they can afford
Yeah, the information's
if
out
they
there.
don't know?
The information's out there. It's been on for weeks for the FinCom sites. We put it out last night. We
Put
have
out
it
what information?
on the tax rates, the tax impacts.
So an individual can go and find their tax impact.
Yeah, you could, if you attended last night's forum, you could figure out your tax impact based on the numbers that we received from the Hamilton and Wenham FinComs. We
Okay,
also
so-
have a sheet coming out on Monday, I think Monday or Tuesday of next week, that will break down the 20 years and the annual rates of increase. So the bond is a decreasing bond, and it'll decrease over time. So yes, you could figure out based on your assessed value. People can also go to the DLS website where you can just put your own house value in, and it'll give you your number for each year because it's a decreasing.
You have to back up. So first you said we don't have the information, and now you're saying that it's in several different places. So I just need some clarification.
I don't think I said that we don't have any information. I just said we had the information that we gave out last night.
Okay. Then Vinny said that it's going to be available sometime next week or the week after.
Yeah, it's a finance group that we work with that's putting together the calculator. So as soon as they can get it put together, we'll get it out there. And we
Okay,
can
so
work
then a
with them.
calculator doesn't exist.
Correct, not right at this time.
Okay, then what are all the other things that are being discussed?
So the last night's forum, we presented each of the towns, their current tax rates for FY25, the average value of a house in each of those, in the two communities, and then the breakdown over a 20-year span of the decreasing bond based on a 4.5% bond rate.
Okay. This is maybe the 10th time that I've asked for this, and I think that it is not meaningful to say this is your average house, because nobody lives in the average house, right? People are going to be making decisions based upon the household income that they live in.
Yep.
And so we have to allow people, and we have to give them time to find the information, and then to make a decision around the information.
Right.
And that means it can't be something that comes out 2 weeks before the vote. It's not going to get in front of everybody.
But early next week, so I can finish my sentence, early next week, we have one-pagers coming out that will have the same information. If you take your house value, divide it by 1,000, and then here's your multiplier for each of the years.
We cannot be asking people, that is us failing to communicate,
Why?
right?
Why?
I don't agree.
You don't
don't
think so?
agree.
No, I think people know the value of their home. They can access it on their tax bills. And then if we give the cost per $1,000, I think that's something people are capable of. I agree that a calculator would be easier for folks, so I like that idea, but I don't think it's impossible to come up with a number.
I think that it looks like we're not trying to be transparent.
So can I just jump in and say about, Eric just mentioned the Wenham FinCom spending all that time, and I actually, at Eric's recommendation, I actually watched the Wenham FinCom's 2 meetings where they did this work, and it was really detailed. And my understanding from watching the meetings is they are finalizing what they're going to present. They're finalizing what the slide is that they're going to present. And while I appreciate you're looking for a calculator, I actually found the slide to be what they're creating is it's a 20-year, block that shows you for various house amounts, how it decreases, where it starts off at year 1 and then goes down for 20 years. Like you can look at this chart, which is different than just plugging in one number and coming up with what it is for this year. Like it was, am I making sense about what I'm?
No, I understand. I think that we are always trying to, we are always in this situation where the message that we're trying to send and the message that's heard is confounded by the fact that we think we're being transparent and we think that we're communicating clearly. And people have lives and jobs and kids. And
Yep.
The only side of the information that we're giving them is not the one that's going to actually be the tax impact, which is going to be substantial, right?
Yeah,
It just is.
Yeah.
There's no way around that.
right, we put that out there.
The biggest voices against the project that I have heard are about taxes.
Yeah.
And we've known for a very long time what the approximate cost is going to be. We now have the actual cost, and I think that it is really incumbent upon this group to do the work that's going to get the information so that people can know what is the impact going to be to me.
I agree with you, what you're wanting to do, but having watched the work that the Wenham FinCom is doing, in other words, I don't want to speak, but the FinCom, each town's FinCom has to be the one that does that work, because,
Yes and no, right? So I actually mentioned something like this to, the other night on the school board, school building committee meeting, right? And I even said, like, even if we, instead of just saying, oh, the average house in Hamilton's 800, and the average house in Wenham's $1 million, which is, I think, the 2 numbers that they're using, I'm like, even if we did here's the, the average for 600, 800, $1 million, 1,200, or whatever. So
That's
at least
how
you're breaking it
Hamilton's
down,
set up.
right?
yeah.
So at least you're breaking it down more, because I hear you. Know who loves the idea of watching those meetings, and the people that are already going to vote yes for it.
No, I'm not,
No, no, no,
I'm
but-
not
but
suggesting
but
people watch
please,
that
but-
meeting, that's not what I'm
No,
suggesting.
but please listen, because what Trent is saying, right, what I hear Trent saying, what I completely 100% agree with him with is we need to, it is our job. It's not, the FinCom's job. The FinCom's job is to figure out what the numbers are. It's our job to now market our product if we think this is what's best. And what we need to do is we need to make this as clear as possible to these people that are on the fence, right? The numbers are very real, right? It is a big number. But I mean, we're going through, the budget tonight, and all I'm thinking of is like, if we don't build new schools, things keep gonna break down, and you know what I mean? And so it's a very real thing. And, it's funny, and I don't mean to put words in Trent's mouth, but I'm hearing him say, well, if we want to get this new school built, this is the material we need to get into the hands as soon as possible to these people who are on the fence.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, I've said all along, I think we'll get a majority of the room. It's getting that 66% that we need. You need to get a lot of people that
I
are
guess what I was
in the
saying was.
gray over to the green.
No, I agree.
Right.
What I was saying was that the numbers need to come from the FinCom. The numbers, they need to do that work. I hear what you're saying about communicating those numbers in a way that's a usable form for people. Is a different, I guess I was just
Well,
trying to say, I
because
think the
like,
numbers.
you know, and even to sort of take it one step further, you know, I'm privy to more information than most in all of this, right? I've seen these numbers, and then I'm like, well, what is my assessed value to my house? You know what I mean? Like, so like there's even like that. I'm like, is it here? Is it here? You know, and like, so like even giving them a calculator is still having them to chase them down to, you know, I'm sure I have a bill, you know, lying around someplace, whatever, but like having to go and actually do that work. The less work we can make people do, the better it is for us in our ultimate goal, if we see that the school is our ultimate goal.
And
I-
I would add to that, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That we have very defined ways that we're advertising this, right? It's going through your newsletters. Every single principal has it sent out in their weekly. You're taking out ads in the newspaper. Like, we can put a QR code to a calculator in all of these places, right?
No, that's a good idea.
I think the good news is we're all in agreement that we want to broadcast these numbers. So maybe thinking about like concrete ways that we all agree are going to achieve that. Can we do that now? Can we make some?
Well, I mean, I think this calculator is really it, right?
Yeah, if
At the
that-
town level, the towns, and Trent had asked last meeting to have you know, can we send out a letter to every household? The towns will not do that
Yeah.
because of the way the numbers work. They're not, you can calculate it out for 20 years. The only one that's gonna be accurate is the first year.
Yeah.
Because it's gonna depend on the split each year across the two towns.
I didn't realize change it every year.
It changes, yeah, every
It was a
single
long
year.
discussion at the Wenham
Yeah.
FinCom.
That's part of the problem that they're having and saying, let's send this chart out because Hamilton has a chart that has just what you said, 500,000, 600,000, 700,000, up to $1 million with the impacts. Easy to do, but Trent wants to hone in even more on if you're $859,000, $700. I get that, I understand that. but
Well,
I think
because
people
then
are
somebody
worried.
who's looking to move into the
Agreed, yeah.
district could say, well, if I'm buying this house, right? Like, and I do think that it's really concerning that, the Wenham FinCom was in the newspaper very prominently last week,
You got-
right?
That was a railroad job.
That whether or not that was the intent, it reflected very negatively on the trajectory of the school district, to my mind.
Yep.
And I think that we need to be as deliberate as possible in getting the information that people are going to use to make their decision to them. And what really concerns me is that we're getting closer and closer to a point where, like next week is 1 month out. I think that we should have a calculator that we are advertising in all of our venues by 1 month out, when we're meeting again next week.
So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great goal. I don't know how we know.
I mean, I don't know why it can be done. It's Google.
It's a finance group that we work with that works with bonding agents to make sure the numbers are accurate and make sure they're literally taking each town's data, pulling it in, and creating the calculators. They're creating two, one for each community. So
Yeah, you
we
need
need to talk
two
to them
separate calculators.
a couple times to try to figure out when and why, again, so we can keep haunting them and.
I just emailed them again.
Yeah, you can just keep
Yeah.
haunting them.
in the meantime, the one-page document that I've been working on with Eric has the sample charts and the dollar amount per 1,000. So in the meantime, we can prioritize that to get on next week's meeting for approval, and then we can distribute it to like library, senior center, like places that we have identified that folks might not get information online or via email.
We also have 2 other charts coming out next week that are, we were waiting for final numbers from the FinComs that'll
Okay.
break down the 20 years. Again, when you get into year 2, it's not an accurate number. It's gonna shift slightly depending on what the split is.
But I don't think people are voting based upon what's happening on year 19. I think they're going
Yeah,
to be
no,
voting
know,
on
but-
in the first
on
year.
year
yeah.
1, yeah.
So that
Year
that,
1's the most accurate.
Well, years 1 is the most accurate and it's the most expensive.
Right.
So
It is good to show
it's
that
good to, for
value
people
will
to
decrease.
understand that, so it's, you know, both of the, I mean, that's an important point, that it's the most expensive, so
Mhm.
that you don't have this fear that it's gonna be
more
more
expensive.
as the years
Each year
goes
it
on.
drops.
Do we have, just to throw some more gasoline onto the fire?
No.
Do we have anything rolling off expenditures in the next couple of years?
By that time, we'll have
In terms of debt, yeah, there are a few, but it's very
small,
Okay, okay.
because it's at the end of,
Well, and-
life cycle.
And also, you have the town, your towns may have things rolling off, like, in other words, that's part of your tax.
I'm trying to figure out
Right,
what
like
I can
that-
do to market this to get people to say yes, right?
Yep.
Like, oh, it's here, but this is coming off, but if it's,
The document that you said you're putting together, are we mailing that to everybody?
We don't
It's for
typically mail
town
it,
meeting.
so we typically distribute it at town meeting. That's the purpose of it.
Okay.
I know, I think you've included it in your emails, right?
Yeah, it goes out in my email,
Posted
yeah,
on
yeah.
Facebook, and
Okay, but we've
Donna,
done
no.
town mailers on the project to the whole town,
We could, yeah.
right?
I would put probably more detail into it than, because this is really a one-page quickie, like, here's the school budget on one side, and on the other side, here's the breakdown of the tax implications, so.
I think that if we had, 6 different million to 500,000 estimates of what your year 1 looks like, and we were able to put that out while we're waiting for a calculator to get built that may or may not be built in a time that allows people to get it, at least that would be something that we would be proactively getting to
Yeah.
everybody.
We have that for Hamilton, we just need to do it for Wenham. Hamilton's already done that work. We can basically steal their sheet, update their numbers, and recreate the same thing for Wenham.
Okay, so,
That's part of what's occurring Monday or Tuesday of next week. We're gonna take the sheet from Hamilton, the sheet from Wenham, now that they're done, make them look the same, and then get those out to people. And we could include them in the mailer. I worry about the same thing that the FinComs worry about. We're sending something out that shows 20 years that's not really accurate.
can we put a footnote saying?
Yeah,
like-
that's what their conversations were, like, how do we make a note on this presentation that
that's
this
fine.
is not accurate?
This is the best,
You
right, this is our best
Guesstimate. yeah.
estimate,
Year 1
but-
would be right, year
Years
2 would
through
shift
20,
depending
yeah.
on the shift, year 3 would shift depending on the shift. It would just depend on how
I
kids
don't even
move.
think you need, to what Trent said, I think all you need is year 1. If you have, 500,000 to, 1.2 million, say, just to throw it out
Well,
for year 1.
right, except you want to make sure that people understand that it is 20 years. I mean, that's information they need to have, like,
Easy, it's a 20-year
right,
bond, here's what
you
year
know.
1 is.
right.
Well, some people don't know what that means. Like, that's a good point, to
Like-
be really clear about, like, this.
Like, that, just to be, I mean, in other words, to be clear about that, like, this is how much it is, and, well, anyway, what I already said, what I thought
We're
the.
sitting here arguing over how clear it is and not sending out the information, no one's gonna
Okay.
get anything.
This
Okay,
is
no,
what
no,
we presented
so-
last night, what's on the screen. This is
Yeah, I was
a
gonna say,
sample of what I presented last night. One for Hamilton, the next slide's for Wenham. They're based on average single family. We can include this in tomorrow's weekly, if you want to put this out, kind of like, actually, I think it's already in there because it was part of the forum. And then the idea is to really take this and make, say, 6 columns, 500,000 to 1 million, or you can go as high as you want, and then literally crank out a spreadsheet based on the increase per 1,000 each year, which we have the charts from both Hamilton and Wenham.
And I'd like to say, I do agree that a calculator to Trent's is a good idea.
Yeah, we'll get it out there as soon as we
But
can
I
get
will
it.
say, I do think like this, I mean, because I've seen this information before, and like, to me, like, if, I was like, wait, the numbers just changed, but I was. it
Yeah,
was
I just
Hamilton
I
before.
switched to Wenham, sorry.
But, and I was like, wait, but I do think this is useful information, even though I know that, like, yes, nobody lives in the average family home, but you do have a general idea, like, if you live in Wenham, and it says that the average family home is $1 million, you have a general idea, like, is my home worth more or less than that? You have an idea, and it says, okay, it's gonna be $2,100. You, like, okay, that's a ballpark, it's a starting point, because I think, you know, a couple of months ago, people would have no idea what ballpark we're in. At least this is like, okay, I get it. This is how much money we're talking about.
And I agree with you for people that are not food insecure, people who are like going to be voting that, you know, people who are going to be voting that are living paycheck to paycheck.
No, I
Like
agree.
the small difference between, you know, something makes a big difference. I do think though that for that same group, being able to show that, you know, it decreases over time
Is
is important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And it's interesting, like, it decreases over time. It doesn't decrease, it's a, I mean, it gets down to half the amount at year 20, but it doesn't decrease drastically. But just knowing that, like, it's never gonna be more than the first year is good information, right? Like that, so,
I think that means it's time.
yeah. No, it is just about,
It's almost time.
it is, yeah. Right,
Can I just ask a question
Yep.
really quickly? If we're planning on sort of turning the one sheet flyer into a mailer, is that what we're talking about doing? Or are we talking about a mailer that exists that we're adding this to?
There is not a mailer that exists. We
Okay.
can use that as a mailer.
Okay, so I just want to talk about the timeline a little bit, because if we're wanting to bring this to the meeting next week so that we can approve
It has to be
it,
approved
send
next
it out.
week,
Yeah,
and
we
then
need to do that.
we would mail it out within 2 days. We'd need to stuff them and
Okay, so,
to the post office and whatever their cycle time is.
and you and I need to have it for Monday to be on the agenda, right? Okay.
Although,
No, it just needs to be
Technically-
on the agenda.
yeah, it just needs to
Oh,
be
we
on
can
the
update the
agenda.
Yeah,
exhibit.
yeah, we can add the exhibit on
The
on
exhibit,
Monday or Tuesday.
so that's, I do want to make that, I want to actually say that so people can hear that, is
That's
that
all right.
like, we as a committee do this, what I think our agendas, and I did not invent the way the agenda's done, and I think it's done really well, that we put all this information in an exhibit form on the agenda. It's really great for people to be able to have that. It is not required. So as long as the information comes to the committee and to the public at the same time,
Then it's fine.
it's fine. So in other words, the agenda, if you're presenting the flyer at the agenda, I mean, at the meeting for the first time, that's not ideal, because it would be nice to have us
To see
have
it
time to see it,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean we
That's a
couldn't do it that way.
courtesy.
So we start tomorrow pushing out the tax rate impact.
Great.
Goes out in my weekly, that's the first time, well, the second time, we started last night.
Yeah, I think,
The third time will be Monday or Tuesday of next week, and then we'll get that flyer approved, get that out, get the calculators up and running. We'll continue to harass the people that are working on it for us.
Do we usually, have we sent that out before with the warrant?
With the warrant?
Yeah.
No, because Hamilton doesn't mail, only Wenham
Right,
mails
yeah.
their warrant
Okay.
to each household. Hamilton does not.
Okay.
and I
so-
don't think they would let you put,
Yeah, I have to
I
get
don't think they
permission
like
from the moderator just to use it at
Right,
town
right, right.
meeting, so.
No, last time we did something, we had an override in a debt exclusion, like 2018 or whatever. It was Mike and Jeff were still here. We did a mailer that we actually mailed like a 4x6 postcard.
Okay, so if we approve this Thursday of next week, then we can start sending it out. Does that feel a little more concrete?
yeah.
A little
And
thoughtful? And I
mean,
agree, I support having a calculator that people can
Yeah,
use.
we'll get it as
But
soon
I,
as we can
but
get it.
I
We'll
also
get it
would
out there.
support putting out what you have right now, because you've put
Yes.
it out, I mean, you've already put it out publicly, so let's
Build
push
the
it out, like what you have.
Build the webpage where you're gonna put the QR code already, so by the time everything gets done and mailed, it should be up and running.
Yeah,
when
well,
it's-
it'll be on the same page that,
We want the QR code
Yeah.
right there.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Like, it's really time to streamline
Yeah.
and clean up all the information, right? we have a data dump where we're overly, overly transparent, I think is the term Trent used last meeting. That is really the case, right? We're so transparent, no one can see anything, right? And now it's time to really get to the gist of the messaging. And
Yeah, you'll see the website change tomorrow. I think tomorrow it's scheduled to change. We were updating it yesterday and today.
Nice.
All right, anybody have anything else?
HDO go nuts, I'll be checking the website all day.
Refresh.
Yeah.
Um,
There's a lot of boxes moving around. It's all box-based.
All right, does anybody have anything else?
Your report.
My chair report, I don't really have anything to report. I did want just official, I guess the only thing is that I did want to just officially confirm regarding the upcoming school committee election on April 10th, that the time for nominations has passed, and the following people have submitted papers. Jeff Austin, Courtney Ashwood, David Frankel, David Polito, and Amy Kuhnberger are running for, so that's 5 people running for 3 seats. Everyone could still change their mind, but nobody else can join in. Anyway, I didn't, and that is, I was going to say something else, but it's gone from my mind, and it's almost 10 o'clock. All right.
Second.
At 9:56.
All right, that was motion by David Polito and seconded by Trent. All right, all those in favor?
Yes.
Yes, and we are adjourned.
Can you second before the...